I don't know why I came back here. Maybe because part of me never really left. It's strange how a place can feel like it's been waiting for you, how the land remembers what you'd rather forget. I told myself it was just another trip, another stop on my cross-country route. But when the road signs started reading Gila National Forest, my hands began to tremble against the steering wheel of my old Volkswagen camper van. I could smell the dust and the pine pitch even before I rolled down the window. That scent, sharp, dry, almost electric, was the same as the night I lost him. I'm 38 now. Been traveling alone for 2 years, making videos, chasing quiet places, pretending that solitude is something I chose. But the truth is, I've been running. It was late afternoon when I pulled off the main highway. The van coughed as it climbed the narrow forest road, its engine echoing against canyon walls, the sound bouncing back like a warning. The sun was lowering fast, bleeding through the ponderosa pines in long copper streaks. I passed only one other vehicle the whole drive. A white pickup pulled over near the trailhead, a man sitting inside, motionless, staring straight ahead. He didn't even glance up as I passed. Something about that stillness lingered. I found a dispersed campsite not far from a creek, flat enough for the van. It looked familiar, though I couldn't say why. Maybe all these clearings look the same after a while. Fire ring of blackened stone, trees standing close enough to whisper to each other when the wind picks up. But when I stepped out and felt the temperature drop, quick, almost sudden, I had this faint electric sense that the forest had just noticed me. I tried to brush it off, set up my small folding table, unpacked dinner supplies, and turned on my phone's flashlight before realizing I had no signal. None, not even a flicker. The quiet was dense, not peaceful, not yet, just total. I started the campfire early, wanting its light before full dark. The van sat a few yards away, old paint catching the last of the orange glow. I've always loved that van. It's more than a vehicle. It's a cocoon, a constant in a life that's been nothing but motion. But sitting there alone, I felt a pulse of unease in the stillness. Every sound carried. The pop of wood, the sigh of wind through needles. Somewhere far off, the echo of something. Maybe an animal, maybe a branch snapping. That's how it begins, always. Tiny things you tell yourself not to notice. As I ate, I kept thinking about him. His name was Caleb. We came here 5 years ago, before everything fell apart. He loved the quiet, the way the stars here looked almost liquid in the night sky. That last night we'd fought stupidly about nothing, and he'd walked off to cool down. I fell asleep, waiting for him to come back. In the morning, his footprints led to the creek and stopped. The search went on for days. They never found him. The officials called it an accident. But the locals whispered about people going missing out here, about how the forest sometimes keeps what it wants. I told myself I didn't believe that. I still don't. Not really. But sitting by that fire, I realized I was back in almost the same stretch of forest, same mountain air, same creek voice, same smell. My chest tightened. I thought about packing up, driving somewhere else, but pride or guilt rooted me to the ground. I turned in early, crawling into the van, closing the sliding door behind me with that familiar metallic click. Inside, everything felt smaller, like the darkness outside was pressing against the windows. I left one curtain open, just enough to see the dying glow of the fire. That's when I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, just deliberate. I froze. The sound came from the back of the van, near the engine compartment. My breath caught in my throat. I waited 10 seconds, maybe more, before unzipping the sleeping bag, every movement sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. I peered through the back window. Nothing. Just trees and shadow. I told myself it was the forest cooling, wood contracting, maybe a rock tumbling, the brain's instinct to explain. It's powerful, even when your gut says otherwise. Eventually I lay back down, one arm draped over my chest to feel my own heartbeat. It was racing. Sometime after midnight, I woke again. No sound this time, but the fire had long gone out. The forest was absolutely black. I glanced at the van's small clock, 3:12 a.m. Then I noticed the smell. Wet earth, but sharper. Like something freshly turned. It drifted through the cracked window, faint but enough to make my stomach tighten. I got up, slid open the curtain, still dark, still nothing. But the smell was stronger now, like soil after rain mixed with something metallic. I thought of Caleb, of the searchers digging along the creek bank years ago, how the air had smelled just like this when they unearthed his shoe. I sat there until dawn, unable to sleep, eyes fixed on the horizon as the world slowly lightened from black to indigo to pale gold. Morning made everything look harmless again. Fire pit trees, the creek glinting in early light. I almost laughed at myself. It was just a smell, just memory mixed with fear. Still, I decided to move campsites that day. Call it instinct, or maybe just cowardice. I told myself I wanted better light for filming. Packed the van, drove deeper into the forest along a dirt road I didn't remember from before. It wound downhill through stands of spruce and juniper, then opened into a meadow rimmed with aspen. Beautiful, remote, the kind of place you could disappear without anyone noticing. I parked near the tree line. The sun was warm again, cutting through the morning chill. I left the doors open while I made coffee, letting the air clear out whatever anxiety had built up overnight. By noon, I was almost relaxed, editing footage, listening to the radio until the signal gave way to static. Then, somewhere beyond the trees, a dog barked. Short, abrupt, then silence. I stood, listening. Another bark, farther away. I didn't see any campers nearby. The forest road was empty. It struck me that a dog, alone out here, didn't make much sense. Then again, plenty of people hike with their pets. I tried to shake it off. But the barking came again that afternoon, always distant, always single bursts, as if marking time, once every few hours. Same direction. By evening, the forest had quieted again, and I convinced myself I'd imagined the pattern. That's what fear does. It rewires you to hear meaning in randomness. Still, I didn't light a fire that night. I cooked inside the van, kept the curtains drawn, the sliding door locked. I sat for hours staring at the reflection of my own face in the glass. Behind me, the dark outline of the forest waited, unmoving. Around midnight, something brushed the side of the van, soft, like fabric against metal. I froze, listening. Then came another sound, low, dragging, circling from the back toward the driver's side. My pulse surged so hard it hurt. "Hello?" I said, my voice small, shaky. No response. I reached for the flashlight and switched it on, aiming it through the curtain gap. The beam caught nothing but my own breath fogging the window. But the smell returned, stronger this time. Wet earth and rust, like freshly turned soil mixed with decay. Something inside me broke through the denial then. That smell wasn't memory. It was here. Now. And it was getting closer. I slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking, turned the key. The van coughed once, then died. Tried again, nothing but the click of the starter. The sound outside had stopped completely. The silence felt alive. I sat there for what felt like hours, muscles locked, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Not a sound. Not a movement. Just that smell, lingering like a ghost. When the first light broke over the treetops, I tried the engine again. This time it started on the first try. Relief flooded me so fast I almost cried. I didn't care where I went, just away from that clearing. As I pulled onto the dirt road, I checked the rearview mirror. And for a brief second, just long enough to register, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the meadow. Still, watching. It wasn't Caleb. I know that, but for a moment my heart didn't. The figure in the mirror was gone before I could blink. Just empty meadow, the pale dawn light spilling over the grass. I kept driving. Didn't look back again. The dirt road wound upward into the high forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy in narrow, dusty rays. The air grew thin, metallic. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized. Every time the van rattled over a rut, I flinched like something might break through the window. It took an hour before I found a paved road again. I should have gone straight out of the forest, back to the highway, to town, anywhere. But something in me wanted closure, a reason, a shape to the fear. I told myself I was looking for service so I could call a mechanic or check a map. But deep down, I think I just wanted proof that what I saw, what I smelled, was real. I stopped at a small pullout overlooking the canyon. Below, the land stretched forever, dry ridges fading into blue haze, silence swallowing sound. I stepped out of the van and breathed, feeling the sun hit my face. The air was crisp, full of pine resin and dust. No smell of soil, no trace of decay. Maybe I just cracked, I thought. Maybe grief does that. It twists time until memory feels physical. Caleb's face came to me again. The last look he gave me before walking off that night. Anger and hurt tangled together. The guilt in my chest flared so sharp it almost doubled me over. I got back in the van, tried to laugh at myself, tried to feel normal again, but normal was gone. The road eventually curved toward a campground sign, Forked Creek Recreation Area. I hadn't planned to stop there, but I needed a place to rest. A few other RVs were scattered between the trees, their solar panels glinting in the sun. It should have made me feel safe, but instead I felt like an intruder in someone else's fragile calm. I parked near the edge of the loop, farthest from the others. A man was sitting by his fifth wheel across the way, sipping coffee, staring at me with a quiet sort of curiosity. He raised a hand in greeting. I nodded back. His face was lined, weathered, maybe late 50s. Something about his eyes, steady, too steady, made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. Inside the van, I forced myself to breathe, to go through the motions. Wash dishes, repack gear, check the battery. All the while, that smell lingered in my mind, even though it wasn't there. I kept thinking about how it seeped through sealed glass, how it came and went like it was choosing its moments. Late afternoon drifted into gold light. I sat outside the van with a book, pretending to read. The man across the way still hadn't moved, just sitting, cup in hand, facing my direction. His RV door open behind him, a shadowed interior where I thought I saw movement, small, fleeting, like someone stepping back. Something about that made my throat go dry. I stood, stretched, and pretended to check my tires, anything to move. He didn't react, didn't even blink. The quiet between us was too long, too deliberate. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" He smiled. Slow. Not unfriendly, but off. Like someone performing a smile from memory. "Sure is," he said. His voice was calm, low. "You're out here alone?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just passing through." "Brave thing to do," he said. "Not many women camp solo around here." I shrugged, pretending it didn't bother me. "I've done it before," he nodded, still watching. "Yeah," he murmured. "Sometimes the forest doesn't like being remembered." The words hit me so hard my skin went cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he just turned his gaze toward the trees and sipped his coffee. When he looked back, his face was blank again, polite, like he hadn't said anything strange at all. I went inside the van and locked the door. For hours, I sat there, pretending to scroll through photos on my camera. The signal was still dead. The sun slipped lower. The campground grew quiet, shadows stretching long across the dirt road. I peeked through the curtain once. The man's chair was empty now. His RV door was closed. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. By dusk, the wind picked up. The aspen leaves rattled like whispers. I heated soup on the small gas stove, trying to shake the tension out of my body, but that phrase kept looping in my head. The forest doesn't like being remembered. I lay down early, locked the doors again, checked them twice. The van felt smaller than ever, walls closing in, air thick. Sometime after midnight, I woke to faint movement outside. Not footsteps, lighter, dragging. The kind of sound you might make if you were pulling something across dry ground. Then came the bark. That same single, short sound I'd heard before. Only closer now, just outside. I froze, listening. Another bark, then a low whine. My brain screamed dog, but my gut said no. The pitch was wrong, like a recording played at half speed. The dragging sound moved to the passenger side, then stopped. My pulse hammered. I reached for the flashlight, but before I could switch it on, something brushed against the metal. A long, slow scrape. I couldn't breathe. Then silence. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was leaking through the curtains. The forest looked soft, harmless again. I got out, checked the van. No footprints, no marks. Just dust. But there, near the edge of the site, the soil looked disturbed, like something had been dug and filled again. I stared at it, heart pounding, every cell in my body telling me, leave. But something stronger than fear rooted me in place. The certainty that whatever was happening was connected to Caleb. I couldn't explain it. It felt irrational, but so did everything about this place. I went back inside, grabbed my camera, and started recording. Not for a video, just for myself. My voice sounded unsteady. "Something's not right out here," I said to the lens. "I don't know what I'm looking for, but I think it's looking for me too." That's when I heard knocking again. 3 times, same rhythm as before, but this time it came from underneath the van. I dropped the camera, scrambled to the door, flung it open. Nothing. Just sunlight filtering through dust. I knelt, heart racing, and looked under the van. Empty. Just dirt, pine needles, a few rocks. But the smell hit me again, stronger than ever. I gagged, stumbled back, pressing my hand over my mouth. The scent was so thick it felt alive. Earth, decay, and something else. Sweet, cloying, almost chemical. When I looked up, the man from the other campsite was standing a few yards away, watching me. "You all right, miss?" he asked. I tried to answer, but couldn't get the words out. He stepped closer, slow. "You smell it too, don't you?" I froze. He nodded, almost to himself. "It comes from the ground," he said quietly. "Always does, before it takes someone new." My legs went numb. Before what takes someone? But he didn't reply. He just turned, walked back toward his RV, and closed the door behind him. That was the last time I saw him. I left that campground within 10 minutes. Didn't even pack properly, just threw everything inside and drove. I didn't know where I was going. The road twisted and dropped, sunlight flashing through the windshield in dizzy intervals. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My brain felt thin, stretched. At some point, I realized I was driving in circles. The same landmarks kept reappearing, same rock formation, same fallen tree. The map app on my phone showed nothing but a blank screen. I pulled over, engine idling, fighting tears. That's when I saw it. On the passenger seat, where my camera bag should have been, lay something else. Something I hadn't put there. A single, mud-caked photograph of me and Caleb, taken the last night we camped here. The photograph was soaked through with dirt, edges curling as if it had been buried for years. But the image was clear. Me and Caleb, standing beside the same Volkswagen van, fire crackling behind us, the night alive with stars. I felt my breath break into short, shallow bursts. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I flipped it over. Blank. No writing. No marks, just the faint smell of soil, the same smell. I don't remember starting the van, don't remember turning the wheel, just the sound of the tires grinding over gravel, dust rising in the rearview mirror. I drove faster than I should have, the road narrowing, the trees closing in like ribs around a heart. I needed out. I needed distance. But every curve looked the same. Every fork in the road brought me back to where I started. Forked Creek, the same sign. The same split rock, the same silence. That's when I stopped believing this was coincidence. I pulled over, slammed the gear shift into park, and got out. The air was heavy, still. Not a single bird, not a whisper of wind. Even the insects were quiet. I shouted Caleb's name before I could stop myself. The sound tore through the quiet like glass breaking. It echoed once, twice, then died. And then a faint reply. Not words. Just a sound, distant from deep in the trees. Something between a cry and a cough. My heart seized. I turned toward it. The underbrush was thick, sunlight barely touching the forest floor. I took one step in, then another. The smell grew stronger with each breath, wet earth, rust, and something like smoke. My rational mind was begging me to stop, to get back in the van, to drive until the fuel ran out. But grief doesn't listen to reason. Guilt even less. I kept walking. The ground grew soft, uneven. My boots sank into mud that shouldn't have been there. It hadn't rained in days. My pulse roared in my ears. Then I saw it. The creek. The same one from 5 years ago. And near the bank, the earth looked freshly disturbed. A mound, small, deliberate. I don't remember kneeling, but suddenly my hands were in the dirt. Clawing, pulling it apart. I was crying, muttering his name over and over like a prayer. And then something hard. Metal. I dug faster until it came loose. It was a belt buckle. Rusted, but I recognized it instantly. Caleb's. The one I'd given him on his birthday. I sat back shaking, breath ragged. The forest swayed around me like it was breathing. Then behind me, a twig snapped. I turned, eyes straining against the dim light. Someone was standing at the edge of the trees. It wasn't Caleb. I knew that immediately. The frame was wrong, too tall, shoulders slouched in an unnatural way, like something mimicking the shape of a person but not quite right. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure stood motionless for what felt like minutes, then slowly, so slowly, lifted one arm. It pointed at me. My legs gave out. I scrambled backwards, slipping on the wet ground, tearing through roots and brush until I reached the van. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them once, twice, before the engine roared to life. I didn't look back again. The tires kicked up mud as I sped down the road. Branches scraped the sides of the van, the forest blurring into streaks of green and shadow. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't hear anything else. But as the road leveled out, a new sound began to emerge. Faint at first, then louder. Knocking from underneath the van. Steady. Deliberate. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. I screamed at the noise, slammed my fist against the dashboard. "Stop it," I shouted, as if it could hear me. But it didn't stop. It kept pace with the rhythm of the tires, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, like something was trying to sync itself to my heartbeat. I turned onto a wider road, one I didn't recognize, and for the first time, I saw signs of civilization. A gas station in the distance, faded and empty. I pulled in hard, gravel crunching under the tires, and cut the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, shaking, staring at the steering wheel. The knocking had stopped, the smell was gone. For a full minute, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I'd lost my mind out there and nothing was real. Then I looked down. On the passenger seat, the photograph was gone. In its place, mud, fresh, wet, smeared in the shape of a handprint. Something inside me cracked open then, not from fear, but from knowing, because that handprint was mine. I stumbled out of the van, gasping, trying to make sense of it. The desert wind hit me full in the face, hot and dry, and for a moment the world tilted, blurred. My head spun. I leaned against the van, breathing hard, and in that blur I heard a voice, soft, familiar. "Why did you come back?" Caleb. It was so clear, so near that for a moment I thought he was standing right behind me. I turned. Nothing, just heat haze, road, and sky. "Why did you come back?" The voice again, but this time it wasn't sound, it was inside my head. Or maybe memory, rising up like something I'd buried too deep. I saw flashes then, his back turned, my own voice shouting in anger, the creek glinting under moonlight. I remembered the argument, but not how it ended, not really. Until that moment, until I saw myself, standing at the creek, holding the belt buckle, screaming at him to come back as he stumbled backward into the dark water. He hadn't walked off. He hadn't disappeared. He drowned. And I had let the story change to something easier to live with, a disappearance, a mystery, because guilt is easier to bear when you can blame the unknown. I fell to my knees on the hot asphalt, sobbing, my mind split between past and present, the knocking, the smell, the looping roads. It wasn't haunting. It was confession. The forest wasn't trapping me. It was showing me what I refused to see. When I finally looked up, the world had gone quiet again. The wind died. The light changed, softened. I climbed back into the van, hands trembling. For the first time in years, I said his name aloud, not in fear, but in apology. "I'm sorry, Caleb." The van started on the first try. The road stretched ahead, long and empty, leading out of the forest into the open desert. As I drove, the air grew lighter. The smell faded completely. The weight lifted, but something in me stayed hollow, an absence that would never quite fill. By the time I reached the highway, the sun was setting again. The sky over New Mexico burned with that impossible red-gold light. I pulled over at a rest stop, got out, and looked back toward the mountains. From here, the forest looked small, peaceful, like it had never held a secret at all. I knew better. Some places don't want you to move on until you face the truth they've been holding for you. Some ghosts don't haunt, they remind. I still travel alone, still camp in my old van. But I don't chase silence anymore. I listen to it. And when the wind shifts, carrying that faint scent of soil and pine, I whisper a thank you, not for the fear, but for the forgiveness hiding inside it. Because the forest never wanted to hurt me, it just wanted me to remember. I've learned something about silence over the years. It isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's a kind of noise that presses against your thoughts, stretches your nerves thin until even your own heartbeat sounds like a threat. My name's Laura. I'm 38, and I've been living out of my Volkswagen camper van for the better part of 2 years now. I tell people it's freedom, the open road, the vastness of the American wilderness, no one to answer to. But the truth is, I think I've been running. Gila National Forest wasn't supposed to mean anything special. It was just another pin on my map, another lonely stretch of New Mexico terrain where I could park for a few nights, make some coffee in the morning, and pretend I had somewhere to go next. But as I turned off the highway that day, with the sun already starting to drop behind the distant hills, I felt something tighten inside me, like a small, invisible knot just below my ribs. Maybe it was because I'd been here before. Not to this exact spot, but close. Silver City, years ago, when I was 20. That trip ended in a way I still don't like talking about. Someone I loved didn't come back from a hike, and I never came back either, not really. Still, the forest looked beautiful that evening, wild, unspoiled, endless. The kind of landscape that makes you feel both insignificant and protected. Pines stood tall like sentinels, and the last light caught the dust in the air, turning it gold. My van rattled down a dirt road until I found a pull-off that looked level enough to camp. No cell signal, no other rigs, just the sound of the wind pushing through the trees. I should have felt peace. Instead, I felt watched. It wasn't the dramatic kind of fear. Not yet. Just a low hum, the kind of unease you can explain away. My rational mind said it was the altitude, or maybe the fatigue from driving. But deep down, a part of me recognized the terrain, the shape of the ridges, the way the shadows fell, how the air smelled faintly metallic. It was too familiar. I got out, stretched my legs, and started setting up camp. The forest had gone strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. You notice these things when you spend enough time alone, how silence shifts when something changes in the environment. There were no insects buzzing, no birds calling, just the faint ticking of my van's engine cooling down. I told myself to relax. I brewed coffee on my small propane stove, watched the steam drift upward and vanish. The temperature dropped fast once the sun slipped away, and a thin mist began to roll down from the hills. I zipped my jacket and took a slow walk around the van, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the mist like a blade, catching on tree trunks and brush. It's strange how you can know you're alone and still feel surrounded. The first sound came just after 9, a single sharp crack, wood snapping somewhere in the darkness. It echoed too close to be comfortable. I froze, light sweeping toward the noise, but saw nothing. My chest tightened, heart stuttering. Probably just a branch. Probably. But the silence that followed was worse. I stood there, holding my breath, listening so hard that my ears began to ring. The mist thickened until it looked like smoke drifting between the trees. I couldn't shake the thought that someone, or something, was standing just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for me to turn away. Eventually, I forced myself back inside the van, locked the doors, tried to read, tried to pretend I wasn't listening for more sounds. It's amazing how quickly your mind can turn on you in isolation. Every creak becomes a footstep. Every gust of wind sounds like a voice. My van, my safe little shell, suddenly felt too small, a tin can in the middle of nowhere. Around midnight, the fog had swallowed everything. I could barely see past the windshield. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing every little sound, the ticking of the cooling metal, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint whine of wind. My pulse matched the rhythm of the forest outside. Then came the tapping. At first it was so faint I thought I imagined it. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the side panel of the van. I held my breath. It stopped. And then, a few seconds later, it started again, this time lower, like fingertips brushing the metal near the back doors. Every instinct screamed, "Don't move." I wanted to believe it was just branches swaying in the wind, but I knew the direction. That side of the van faced the open clearing. There were no trees close enough to touch it. I reached slowly for my flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it, the clatter loud as a gunshot in the silence. The tapping stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. Then came the sound of footsteps, faint but deliberate, circling around the back of the van, gravel crunching. Slow, pausing between each step. I didn't dare breathe. I could see my reflection faintly in the window, eyes wide, pale face, a ghost in my own van. I thought about honking the horns, starting the engine, anything to break the moment, but I was paralyzed. The footsteps reached the driver's side and stopped. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. And then finally I saw movement through the fog. A faint outline just beyond the glass. Someone was standing there, not close enough to see their face, but close enough that the shape of their shoulders, the tilt of their head were unmistakable. They didn't move, and neither did I. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. My chest felt like it would explode. Then, as silently as they'd appeared, the figure turned and melted into the mist. I stayed awake until dawn, engine running, headlights cutting through the fog until the first hint of blue appeared in the sky. When the light returned, I finally stepped outside. There were footprints in the dirt, not boots, not shoes. Bare feet. They circled the van twice. I packed up in record time. Every nerve in me was vibrating, every instinct screaming to leave. But the forest wasn't done with me yet. The road out twisted down through canyons and ridges, each turn swallowing me deeper into the green. I tried to calm down, to rationalize what I'd seen, maybe a hiker, maybe someone camping nearby who'd gotten lost. But then I noticed something odd. Every few miles, there were signs. Primitive campground, closed for maintenance, handwritten all different, nailed to trees. I'd seen none of them on the way in. That's when I realized there wasn't supposed to be anyone out there at all. I kept driving, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The dirt road narrowed as it wound between steep slopes, pines leaning inward like spectators closing in to watch me unravel. Every sound felt amplified inside the van, the rattle of loose pans, the clink of my coffee mug, the dry scrape of gravel under the tires. I wanted to believe I was heading toward safety, toward some kind of civilization. But after an hour of driving, there were still no signs of life. No parked cars, no ranger stations, not even the faint hum of distant traffic. Just forest. Endless and ancient. And those signs. Every few miles, another one. Closed for maintenance. No overnight camping. Do not enter. The handwriting changed each time. Thick black marker on warped plywood, some neat, some hurried. The nails were rusted, the wood sun-bleached. Right? I slowed down to look at one. The letters weren't old. The marker ink was still dark. I thought about turning around, but the idea of going back, of driving past that clearing, of seeing those barefoot prints again, made my stomach twist. So I pressed forward, deeper into the maze. Hours passed. The GPS on my dash blinked uselessly, a frozen arrow in the middle of a blank map. My phone had no service, not even for emergencies. That's the thing about isolation. It doesn't just separate you from the world, it erases it. By early afternoon, the heat had climbed. I pulled over at a shaded turnout to breathe, stretch, maybe find some sense of direction. The air smelled dry and mineral, like sun-baked rock. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against a tree, that steady, hollow rhythm breaking the quiet. I told myself I was fine. I said it out loud, "You're fine, Laura." But when I turned off the ignition, the forest swallowed the sound again. Total stillness. Even the woodpecker stopped. There's a kind of quiet that feels like it's watching you back. I stepped out of the van and checked the ground. Dust, pine needles, nothing unusual. Still, that knot in my stomach wouldn't untie. I circled the van once, twice, just to make sure nothing was off. That's when I noticed it, carved into the bark of a nearby tree, faint but deliberate. "You shouldn't have come back." The words were etched deep, the cuts darkened by sap. They weren't old either, the bark still raw where the blade had bitten in. For a moment I couldn't move. My brain tried to reason through it, Maybe it was some hiker's cruel joke, maybe a leftover from years ago. But then the cold truth crept in. Whoever wrote it had been here recently. I got back into the van and locked every door, every latch. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I drove without direction, following the faint promise of open sky. The dirt road forked, split, and merged again, and soon I wasn't sure which turns I'd already taken. Every ridge looked the same. Every grove mirrored the last. By late afternoon, I found myself at a dried riverbed. The van could go no farther without risking a blown tire, so I parked and decided to rest before backtracking. The sun was dropping fast, and I didn't want to drive blind in that maze again. Inside the van, I closed the curtains and tried to steady my breathing. I made dinner, a can of soup I barely tasted. I could feel my mind fraying at the edges, logic fighting panic. The human brain hates uncertainty. It fills it with whatever story fits best. And my story was starting to look like a trap. I thought again about the person who disappeared here all those years ago, Ethan, my brother. We'd come to Gila together in our 20s. I'd been the cautious one. He'd always wanted to explore beyond the trails, find what he called the quiet places people forgot. When the search party found his pack weeks later, miles from where he was last seen, they said it looked like he'd just kept walking. No animal tracks, no struggle. Just gone. And now here I was, repeating the same mistake. By the time darkness came, I was shaking. Every instinct said to drive, anywhere, just move, but exhaustion pinned me down. So I stayed, every nerve on alert. Sometime past midnight, I woke to another sound. Not tapping this time. Breathing. It was faint, muffled, like someone standing just outside the van's side door. Slow inhales, slow exhales, steady, deliberate. I sat up, frozen. The air inside the van felt thick, heavy. I didn't want to look, but I did. The curtain was trembling slightly, just the faintest movement. I reached for the flashlight, hands trembling, and pulled the curtain back in one swift motion. Nothing. But the breathing didn't stop. It was on the other side now, near the rear window. A slow exhale against glass. I couldn't see a shape, just the condensation spreading across the pane, a foggy circle, as if someone's face was pressed close. That broke me. I turned the key, slammed the van into gear, and tore through the dark. Dust exploded behind me, gravel spitting like gunfire. My headlights jumped wildly across trees and boulders, revealing flashes of movement. Maybe deer, maybe shadows, maybe my own fear taking form. I drove until I saw the faint gleam of pavement, the main road. Relief hit so fast it almost made me dizzy. I didn't even care where it led. I just followed it until finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a sign for Lake Roberts, a small campground, and beyond that, a ranger station. When I pulled in, I didn't stop shaking for a long time. The ranger on duty was a young guy, probably in his 20s. He looked startled when he saw me. "Ma'am, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed. "Something like that," I said. I told him what happened, the footprints, the signs, the person outside my van. His expression tightened as I spoke. When I mentioned the carving on the tree, he went still. He went still. He disappeared into the back office and came out with an old map, spread it on the counter. "Show me where you camped," he said. I traced my finger roughly along the dirt road I'd taken, where the turnoff split. He nodded slowly, then exhaled. "That area's been closed for years," he said quietly. "Flash floods washed out the trails. We don't maintain the roads there anymore. You shouldn't have been able to get through." "But there were signs," I said, "all the way in, new ones." He frowned. "Ma'am, we haven't put any new signs in that district since 2017. Something cold uncoiled in my stomach. He offered to check the area in the morning, but I couldn't stay another night. I thanked him, got back in the van, and drove until the forest finally gave way to open desert. I slept on the side of the road that night, under a sky so wide and bright, it almost felt forgiving. When morning came, I made coffee and looked at the horizon, the same way I've done 100 times since. The forest still calls to me sometimes. It's strange how the places that break us still pull at the edges of who we are. I think back to that breathing outside my van, to the words carved into the tree. You shouldn't have come back. I used to think it was a warning from someone else. Now, I think it was from me, from the part of myself that never left that forest all those years ago. We all carry places that haunt us. Some are forests, some are memories, and some, like Gila, are both. So if you ever find yourself driving down a dirt road in New Mexico, chasing quiet, looking for peace, just remember, silence isn't always safety, and not every road on the map wants to be found. I used to think silence meant peace. That's why I went camping, or maybe running into it. My name's Laura Kent, I'm 39, and for most of my adult life, I lived by the hum of machines and the glow of screens. I bought my Volkswagen camper van, a faded 1987 Westphalia, to trade noise for stillness. I told myself I was reclaiming something. Space, clarity, maybe even courage. After my divorce, after the apartment emptied, the van felt like a heartbeat I could drive. That autumn, I decided to trace the Blue Ridge Parkway down into the North Carolina side of the Great Smoky Mountains, where the map turned green and the radio turned to static. I'd read about a primitive campground near Cataloochee, tucked deep between ridges. It wasn't commercial. No hookups, no crowds, no signal. Just forest and fog. That's what I wanted, or at least what I said I wanted. I remember the first turnoff vividly. The paved road became gravel, and the sound of tires changed. Softer, more granular. The trees leaned closer, their leaves wet and heavy with mist. Every now and then the fog thinned just enough to show the blue shimmer of distant ridgelines, then swallowed them again like memory. It was early afternoon, but it felt like evening. The light was pale and cold, the kind that erases shadows instead of casting them. When I reached the campground, it was empty. 12 sites scattered near a narrow creek, all dark and unoccupied. A wooden sign hung crookedly, Cataloochee Primitive Campground. Someone had carved initials into it, the letters weathered down to ghostly grooves. I parked at the far end, near the tree line, where the forest rose steeply into slope. The air smelled of moss, iron, and something faintly sweet, the way wet leaves sometimes mimic decay. I set up camp mechanically, leveled the van, rolled out the awning, lit my small propane stove. The sound of it, that soft hiss of blue flame, was oddly comforting, almost human. I made coffee even though I didn't need it. The silence wasn't empty. It moved. It breathed. I could hear the creek, a restless murmur beneath the trees, and deeper than that, the long, low moan of wind threading through the pines. Sometimes it almost formed words. That first night, I sat by the small campfire I built, watching sparks rise and vanish into fog. I told myself the unease I felt was just transition. The brain adjusting to the absence of noise, the body catching up to solitude. But even as I said it, I noticed something strange. The woods were too still between gusts. You know how forests have layers of sound, birds, insects, the drip of water? This one didn't. It had gaps. The longer I listened, the more I felt those gaps pressing inward, like silence had weight. At one point, a branch cracked high up the ridge. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for movement or echo. Nothing. Just the fog, thick as wool, settling closer. By midnight, the temperature dropped fast. I doused the fire and climbed into the van. My headlights caught the trunks of trees, hundreds of them, pale and slick, each one like a vertical scar disappearing into the mist. Inside, I tried to read, but the walls of the van felt too close. I shut the book, turned off the lantern, and listened. The creek was louder now, but its rhythm felt wrong, uneven, as if something large kept displacing the flow. I tried to rationalize, falling branches, deer, the wind shifting currents, but my gut disagreed. It pulsed in warning, that low animal hum you learn to ignore in cities but can't in the wild. Sometime around 3 a.m. I woke suddenly. No noise woke me, it was the absence of one. The creek had gone silent. I sat up, every sense sharpened to pain. The air felt dense, metallic. My breath clouded faintly in the cold. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, not exactly. It was the sound of weight moving through wet ground. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. I couldn't tell how far away. In fog, sound folds. A few feet can sound like 100. I switched on my headlamp and aimed it through the van window. The beam cut through mist, illuminating droplets like falling glass. Nothing moved. Then came another sound, softer this time, a kind of dragging like something being pulled through leaves. I told myself it was just a bear, or maybe foraging along the creek. My mind clung to that word, bear. Something ordinary, something that obeyed rules. But then, whatever it was stopped moving, right when I whispered the word aloud. I didn't sleep again that night. By dawn, fog had seeped into everything, my clothes, my bedding, even my hair. I stepped outside on the forest blanketed in pale vapor. The ground was soft, the leaves damp and matted. Near the creek, I noticed impressions in the soil. Not footprints, not human, not paw prints either. More like indentations, circular, irregular. The kind of marks you'd get if something heavy had been set down, then dragged. I crouched closer, half expecting to find an explanation. But there was only one thing certain. Whatever made those marks had come from the trees and moved toward the water. I followed the creek upstream, maybe 50 yards. The fog thickened and the air grew colder. Then I saw something that made me stop completely. A piece of fabric hung from a branch, faded red flannel, shredded at one end. Beneath it, the earth was dark, churned up as if something had dug there recently. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. When I turned back, I realized I'd lost sight of my van. The fog had folded around me like a curtain. Every direction looked the same: gray trunks, wet leaves, absence. Panic came quietly, then all at once. My breathing grew fast, shallow. I tried to listen for the creek, had to orient myself by sound, but it was drowned out by another, faint, repeating. It sounded like tapping. 3 taps, pause, 3 again. Not woodpecker fast, but human slow, deliberate. I turned toward it, then froze. The sound stopped. That was the first time I felt it. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. The realization that something else was aware of me. I ran, half blind through the mist, until the outline of the van finally reappeared. When I reached it, I slammed the door and locked it, even though locks felt useless against something you couldn't define. For hours, I sat there in silence, gripping my steering wheel like it could anchor me to logic. When the fog finally thinned enough to see the treetops, I started the engine. The van coughed, stuttered, then caught. The sound of that motor was salvation. The mechanical heart I'd come here to escape now became my only comfort. But as I backed out of the sight, I noticed something else. On the inside of my windshield, faint but visible in condensation, were 3 fingertip-sized smudges, perfectly aligned. 3 taps. I wiped the glass clean, convincing myself it was condensation. Nothing more, just the pressure of the night making patterns. My hands trembled anyway. The forest around me was waking, birds starting up in uncertain bursts, the first thin light spilling through fog. But it didn't feel like morning. It felt like an intermission, like whatever moved in the dark had just stepped aside to let me breathe before continuing. I told myself I'd leave right then. I'd drive back down that gravel road, follow it until I saw pavement, until the signal bars returned to my phone, until sound felt normal again. But the mountains had other plans. Half a mile down the narrow road, the van lurched. I stopped. Steam hissed from under the rear hatch, the kind of sound that erases all hope. When I lifted the lid, the smell of antifreeze hit me, sweet and sharp. A radiator hose had split wide open. I stood there for a long time, watching the steam rise into the mist, realizing just how far I was from anything that could help. No signal, no traffic, no sound but the wind threading through branches. So I turned the van around, slowly, carefully, and rolled back toward the campground. I figured I could wait it out, patch the hose in daylight, maybe hike down to the ranger station if I had to. It was just a setback, I told myself. People broke down here all the time. But as I pulled back into my old site, something felt off. My fire pit had been rearranged. The stones were stacked higher, uneven, and inside it, the ashes were gone, cleared completely. There was also something new. 3 stones, small and round, placed side by side near my van door, each one marked with a single vertical line scratched into its surface. I picked one up, then dropped it almost instantly. It was warm. Not sun warm, body warm. That's when I noticed the smell. The forest air had changed. It was still damp and cool, but beneath it was a faint sour odor, like wet metal. I tried to trace it, but it seemed to move with the wind, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead. I spent most of that morning pretending to be busy. I boiled water for coffee I didn't drink. Checked the van again and again, like repetition could control reality. The silence that had unnerved me before now felt hostile. Every sound carried too far. The click of the stove, the creak of the van door, echoing back from trees as if someone was mimicking me. Around noon, a ranger finally arrived. I heard the vehicle before I saw it. The low growl of a diesel engine rolling over gravel. Relief washed through me. I stepped into the road, waving both arms. The truck stopped about 10 feet away. The window rolled down halfway. The man inside wore the uniform, green shirt, badge, name tag. But there was something off about his stillness. He didn't lean forward to talk, didn't smile, just stared at me through the half-lowered glass. "Morning," I said, voice cracking from disuse. "My van broke down. You got any cell coverage up here?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "You camped here last night?" "Yeah." "You alone?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just me." He nodded once, slow, eyes never leaving mine. "You shouldn't be here, not this time of year." I managed a small, nervous laugh. "Why's that?" He looked past me toward the slope behind my sight. Things move different when the fog stays more than 2 days. Before I could ask what that meant, he started the truck again. "Wait. Can you call someone? Tow truck, ranger station, anything." But he shook his head. "Station's closed. You'll have to wait till morning." Then he drove off. No offer of help. No radio. Just gone. The road swallowed the sound of his engine, and the silence afterward felt like a door closing. I stood there for a long time, the words looping in my mind. Things move different when the fog stays more than 2 days. By late afternoon, the fog began to return. Heavier, thicker, curling low through the trees like smoke. I decided to stay inside the van, engine off, doors locked. As night settled, I started hearing it again. The tapping. 3 knocks, faint, rhythmic, sometimes from the back of the van, sometimes the roof. Each time I turned on my light, it stopped. I told myself it was branches, just branches. But then around midnight, I saw movement outside the window, something pale just beyond the glass, too tall for an animal, too still for a person. The fog distorted it, stretched it until it no longer had shape, just a vertical shimmer like heat above asphalt. I shut my eyes and waited. When I opened them again, it was gone. The rest of the night, I stayed awake listening, not for footsteps, for breathing. I could swear I heard it sometimes, faint and wet, close enough that the glass should have fogged from it. At dawn, I stepped outside. The fog had thinned, but something was different about the forest. It took me a moment to realize what. Every single tree near my sight had a long vertical scratch on its bark, not deep but fresh, as if something had brushed along them, circling me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. I packed up what little I could and started walking, toward where the ranger had come from, hoping the road led somewhere. The woods were silent, no birds, no insects, only the sound of my boots in wet leaves. After an hour, I reached a small clearing. At the center stood an old wooden signpost, half collapsed, its lettering almost gone. But one word was still readable, Cove. And under it, someone had nailed a newer sign, hand-painted in red, "Do not stay after dark." I turned around. The fog was already rising again from the valley below, curling through the trees, swallowing the road behind me. When I finally made it back to my van, the windshield was covered in condensation again. But this time, the smudges weren't 3. They were 6. 2 sets, opposite sides of the glass, like someone had been looking in. I started the engine without thinking, without caring if the hose burst again. The van roared, coughed, then steadied. I backed out, gravel spraying behind me, eyes fixed on the road ahead. But even as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fog wasn't lifting. It moved with me, clinging to the van, coiling around every curve of the road, as if the mountain itself refused to let me go. I drove until the gaslight came on, until the road widened into a turnout overlooking a steep ravine. The mist opened for just a moment. enough to see how high I was, how far the forest stretched below. That's when I saw it. Down in the hollow, through the thinning fog, something glinted. Rows of shapes, metallic, lined up in the clearing. I squinted. Then my stomach dropped. They were vans, dozens of them, rusted, stripped, half-consumed by vines. Some still had curtains in the windows. One of them, same color as mine, had the same sticker on the back, a faded compass rose. The fog closed in again, erasing them. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there, the engine idling, staring into the white until my own reflection began to bleed into the glass. And behind it, faint, but there were the smudges. 3, then 6, then 9. I wiped them away with my sleeve, started driving again, and didn't stop until I hit pavement. When I finally got cell service, I checked my mirrors one last time. For a second, I thought I saw a movement in the fog rolling off the mountains. Something tall, upright, pacing the tree line, but maybe it was just the light, or the exhaustion, or the mountain's last warning. I sold the van a month later. And sometimes late at night, when fog drifts down into the valley where I live now, I swear I can hear it again. 3 faint knocks on glass, steady as breathing. After that night, I swore off camping altogether. I told myself I'd traded adventure for peace of mind. That fear had cured me of foolish solitude. But the truth is, I didn't stop because I was afraid of the forest. I stopped because a part of me still belonged to it. For months, I couldn't sleep without the hum of an engine nearby. Silence made me nauseous. Fog made my heart race. Every time I heard water moving, even through a drain pipe, it brought back the sound of that creek choking itself quiet. Friends told me it was just trauma. That fear bends memory, makes ordinary things monstrous. I wanted to believe them. I tried to. But something about the way the Smokies swallowed sound and light felt too calculated to be imagination. Still, I needed closure. I wanted to know if there was something factual to anchor what had happened, something rational. So a few months later, I started researching. I called the Park Service, local rangers, anyone who might know about Cataloochee. Most of them told me it was closed off season, that fog and flooding made the road dangerous. One ranger mentioned landslides. Another, more reluctantly, said there were structural concerns. But one night, after hours of scrolling through forgotten hiking forums, I found a thread, years old, titled "Van Found Abandoned Near Cataloochee Campground." There were only 3 replies. The first said it had been towed out in 2013, no sign of the owner. The second said the site had been sealed off for soil testing. The third reply came from a user with no profile picture. It read, open quote, "They don't like engines running at night." Close quote. That was it. Nothing more. I should have stopped there. But curiosity has its own gravity. It pulls you back to the places that almost killed you. A year later, I went back to North Carolina. I told myself it was just a drive, a way to make peace with the landscape, to see it in daylight, under control. I didn't bring the van this time. I rented a small SUV, something forgettable. The park entrance had changed, new fencing, new signs. The road into Cataloochee was blocked by a rusted gate and a small plaque that read, "Closed due to unstable ground, no public access." I parked on the side of the highway and walked. The air was thin, cooler than I remembered. The forest seemed less menacing, more asleep. I followed the overgrown road for nearly an hour before the first wave of fog started rolling in. Soft, low, harmless. That's when I found the first marker, a wooden post half buried, carved with 3 vertical lines. My throat tightened. I told myself it could mean anything, a boundary, an old trail marker. But the closer I got to where my campsite had been, the more of them I found. Always in 3s. When I reached the clearing, I stopped breathing. The site was gone, completely. No sign of fire pits, no flat gravel pads, nothing but trees, taller now, clustered tightly together as if they'd grown overnight. I stood in the center of what used to be my spot and felt the ground shift faintly under my boots. The soil was soft, wet, almost hollow. When I pressed my heel down, I heard a faint echo. That's when I realized I wasn't standing on earth. I was standing on something buried. Metal. I knelt, brushed away leaves, and uncovered a sliver of rusted surface. A curve. A faint glint of paint, pale green, the same color as my old Volkswagen. My breath caught. It couldn't be. I'd sold mine. I knew the VIN, the plates, everything. And yet, here it was. The same contour, the same vent ridges, half swallowed by the mountain. I stepped back, every instinct screaming. That's when I heard it again. 3 knocks, faint, deliberate from beneath my feet. I don't remember running. I only remember the sound of my own heartbeat matching the rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 again. As I tore through fog and forest until I reached the gate. I didn't stop until the mountains were behind me. For days afterward, I tried to explain it away. The mind plays tricks, the forest echoes, fog distorts distance, but deep down, I knew. The Smokies are not haunted by ghosts. They are haunted by what they remember, and they remember everything we bring into them. Cars, fires, footsteps, fear. They absorb it all. I learned later that the Great Smoky Mountains are ancient, older than the Rockies, older even than bones we dig from the ground. Their soil is dense with decay and memory, constantly shifting, swallowing, and exhuming what doesn't belong. People disappear there more often than anyone admits. Not always in dramatic ways, sometimes just lost, consumed by fog and disorientation. Sometimes they're found years later, only yards from where they started. Sometimes not at all. I think about that often, how small we are inside something so patient. How quickly we mistake quiet for kindness. Every map I've looked at since marks that part of Catalucci as restricted for restoration. But I know better. The mountain isn't restoring, it's digesting. It doesn't want visitors. It wants silence. And maybe in some warped way I understand that. Because silence is what I went searching for, and silence is what it gave me. But sometimes late at night, when fog drifts through my neighborhood, I catch myself doing something strange. I turn off the television. I stand by the window. I listen. And every so often, beneath the hum of the streetlights, I swear I can hear the forest breathing. It's a slow, steady sound, the rhythm of something vast and indifferent, the kind of breathing that doesn't need lungs. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if I'd stayed that second night, if the van hadn't started. If I'd ignored the warning in the ranger's voice, maybe I'd have become one more echo in the soil, one more shape under fog. Or maybe I'd have learned the mountain's language, the way it knocks to warn, to claim, to remember. I'll never know. And maybe that's the real terror. Not what we see, but what we almost did. I tell people now that I don't camp anymore, that the van was a phase, a story from another life. But sometimes when the road curves and the air turns damp, I feel that old pull again, that ache for quiet, for space. And I wonder if the forest still remembers me. If somewhere up there in the endless gray between ridges, the mountain still waits, patient, ancient, alive. Maybe it does. Because every time fog touches glass, every time it leaves 3 faint marks that vanish before I can photograph them, I feel the same stillness I felt that night. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition, the kind that whispers from soil and stone and water, reminding you, you never really left, and the mountain never forgets. The night the mountains turned on me, I remember the silence first. It wasn't the kind of silence you find in a library or a sleeping town. It was heavier, older, as if the air itself had decided to stop moving. It pressed against my van windows, dense and cold, while the rest of the world seemed to hold its breath. My name's Mara, 39 years old, and I've been living half of my life on the road, one campsite, one forest road, one empty overlook at a time. It's not freedom I chase anymore. It's distance. Distance from people, from questions, from the slow corrosion that starts when you let others close enough to disappoint you. That night, I had parked my old Volkswagen Westphalia just off a Forest Service road somewhere between Estes Park and Grand Lake, on the Colorado side of the Rockies. It was late September, that in-between time when the air smelled faintly of frost and the aspens were turning, gold bleeding into the slopes like veins of fire. I'd chosen that spot because it was quiet, remote, the kind of place most people skip because there's no cell service, no picnic tables, no hookups, just a few rough clearings scattered along a dirt road that zigzagged up a ridge like an old scar. The day had been long but peaceful. I'd hiked a few miles along an unmarked trail, cooked lentils over my little propane stove, and watched the light slip off the peaks like oil off water. I remember thinking, for the first time in months, that I felt something close to content. Then came the noise. It started small, a faint tapping like a branch caught in a breeze, except there wasn't any wind. And when I stepped outside with my headlamp, the trees stood still, their shadows long and brittle, unmoving in the cold. I told myself it was nothing. I've camped alone for years. I know how the mind invents things when it's dark. I climbed back into the van, slid the side door shut, and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. But the tapping came again. Then a pause. Then a second, sharper knock. It was deliberate this time. The first pulse of adrenaline hit so fast it made my teeth ache. I sat up, holding my breath, staring at the window. The interior of the van was dim, the little battery light glowing soft amber, and all I could see in the glass was my own reflection. Pale face, wide eyes. "Hello?" I said before I could stop myself. No answer. I reached for the flashlight again, switched it off and on twice, the beam cutting through the thin curtains, illuminating nothing but the wet sheen of pine trunks. Something in me wanted to believe it was an animal, a deer brushing against the van, a raccoon scavenging, but the knock hadn't been random. It was too measured, too human. I waited. A minute passed, then 2, then 10. Nothing. Eventually, I lay back down, heart still racing, but exhaustion heavier. Sleep came in short, broken fragments. When I woke again, it was 2:47 a.m. I know because my phone screen glared at me from the dashboard like an accusing eye. The temperature had dropped, my breath fogged the glass, and from somewhere outside I heard footsteps, not the crack of animal hooves. These were soft, deliberate steps, padding across dirt and pine needles. Too close, too slow. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. The footsteps circled once, then stopped behind the van. A scraping sound followed, metal on metal, like someone brushing a key or a knife against the handle of the back hatch. That's when my fear stopped being theoretical. I sat up fast, my pulse hammering so hard I thought it might shake the van itself. I kept my light off, listening, trying to track the sound. The scraping stopped. Then, almost tenderly, came a voice, quiet, low, almost casual. "You out here alone?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat closed, and every instinct I'd spent years learning screamed, "Don't respond." People on the road learn to read tone. That one didn't sound right. It wasn't curious. It wasn't kind. It was probing. Testing. When I didn't answer, the footsteps moved again, slower now, pacing along the side door. I pictured the man, because in my mind it was a man, trying to peek through the curtains. I thought about grabbing my phone, but it was useless. There was no signal this high up. My bear spray was in the glove compartment. My keys in the jacket pocket I'd hung by the sink. Everything suddenly felt too far away. He knocked on the door again, this time 3 times, steady, polite. "You all right in there?" he asked. That voice again, too calm, too rehearsed. I said nothing. Then, like a switch flipped, his tone changed. He laughed, a single short exhale, and said, "Suit yourself." Footsteps retreated into the dark. I waited for them to fade completely before moving. A full 10 minutes of silence. Then I crawled forward slowly until I could peer through the windshield. Nothing but night. The road empty, the forest still. I didn't sleep again. I sat upright, gripping my keys, listening for any sound that might tell me he'd come back. My reflection in the window began to look like someone else's face. Hollow. Scared. Alert. When dawn finally arrived, it felt unreal, like the world had rebooted without warning. The forest looked normal again. Sun on the trees, mist lifting off the ground, nothing out of place. Still, I packed up fast. My hands shook as I folded the camp chair, checked under the van, scanned the dirt road for footprints. There were some faint impressions leading away into the woods. Heavy, boot-shaped. I drove out without breakfast, following the winding descent until the trees thinned and the road spat me onto Highway 34. Only then, when I reached a small overlook with a view of the valley below, did I let myself stop. For a long time, I just sat there, engine idling, coffee growing cold, trying to convince myself it was fine now, that the night had just gotten the better of me. But when I finally stepped out to breathe, I noticed something carved into the thin layer of dust on the van's back hatch. Letters drawn with a fingertip, uneven but deliberate. It said, "Next time, say hello." The words on the hatch didn't wash away easily. I wiped them with my sleeve, but the dust clung to the paint, and the faint outline of "Next time, say hello" remained, a ghost sentence staring back at me. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe someone from earlier in the day had walked by, seen my van, thought it was funny. Maybe it was a prank, a local who knew campers got jumpy, but the lie didn't hold long. No one had passed that way. I'd seen no other tire tracks, no footprints when I arrived. Whoever had been out there in the dark hadn't just stumbled across me, they had found me. I left the overlook and drove south, not caring where, just wanting distance. The highway coiled through the mountains like a snake. Tight curves, steep drop-offs, endless trees. Every time I checked my rearview mirror, I expected to see a truck behind me, headlights keeping perfect pace. There was nothing, only the empty road and the sound of my engines straining against the climb. By mid-morning, I reached a small general store in a place called Pine Junction, little more than a gas pump, a rusted sign, and a bulletin board covered in flyers for missing dogs and used ATVs. The woman behind the counter wore a red flannel shirt and spoke with the kind of slow, patient rhythm you only find in mountain towns. "You look like you've been up all night," she said, scanning my coffee and protein bar. "Yeah," I said. "Didn't sleep great." She nodded like she understood but didn't pry. When I stepped outside again, I saw an old white pickup parked 2 spaces away. The driver's seat was empty, but the door hung open. A jacket draped over the mirror, the kind of heavy canvas type that forest workers wear. Something about it made my stomach knot. I couldn't say why. Maybe just the way it sat there, door yawning open like someone had left in a hurry. I glanced around the lot. Nobody else. No sound except the wind scraping across the asphalt. I climbed back into my van and locked the doors. By noon, clouds had begun to roll in, flattening the light into a gray smear. I decided to head deeper into the range, toward a place called Stillwater Reservoir, where the Forest Service map showed dispersed campsites along the shoreline. Remote again. Quiet. I told myself I needed to reset, to reclaim that feeling of peace the mountains had once given me. But part of me, the part I tried hard to ignore, wondered if I was just running from something I couldn't name. The road to Stillwater was rough. Ruts and stones, narrow passes where the trees scraped both sides of the van. When I finally reached the lake, it was nearly evening. The water was low, a wide basin of mud and silence. I parked near a stand of pines and killed the engine. The quiet that followed was thick, almost physical. I tried to shake the unease with routine, unpacked the camp stove, made instant noodles, played a podcast just loud enough to fill the air. But every sound seemed too loud, too intrusive. Even the boiling water hissed like a whisper. Then, as the sun dipped and the world went blue, I noticed something. Across the water, maybe 50 yards away, a light flickered between the trees. Faint but steady. A campfire, small and contained. I hadn't passed any other vehicles on the way in. No tents, no RVs. Yet someone else was out there. For a few minutes, I tried to ignore it. People had a right to camp here too. But when the fire dimmed and flared again, I saw a figure move. Just one, standing near the water's edge, backlit by flame. He stood too still. Watching the lake, maybe, or the reflection of my headlights before I turned them off. I ducked inside the van, pulled the curtains shut, and told myself not to spiral. But the longer I sat there, the more I could feel the old instinct tightening, the same one that had kept me alive on lonely roads in strange parking lots, with strangers who smiled too much. Don't trust anyone. I turned off the interior lights and waited. Half an hour passed, then an hour. The fire across the lake faded to embers. The night took over. That's when the sound came again, not tapping this time, but a low crunch of footsteps on gravel, approaching from the direction of the water. I froze. They were slow, careful, coming closer. I grabbed my flashlight, kept it off. Through a slit in the curtain, I could see a vague shadow moving along the shoreline, heading straight toward me. I thought about starting the engine, driving away, but the road was narrow, full of rocks, and I'd have to back up first. Whoever was out there would hear the ignition, see the lights. So I stayed still, barely breathing. The footsteps reached the edge of the clearing, then stopped. For what felt like an eternity, nothing moved. Finally, a voice broke the silence. Low, male, same calm tone I'd heard 2 nights before. You didn't say hello. My blood turned to ice. I lunged for the keys. The engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel. I slammed the van into gear and tore down the dirt road, not caring about the branches whipping the sides. The headlights bounced over ruts, painting the trees in jerky flashes of white. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of him, a dark silhouette standing in the middle of the road, motionless, the glow of my brake lights flickering against his jacket. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again. By then, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely steer. I drove until dawn. No music, no thoughts, just the steady hum of the tires and the hollow sound of my breath. When I finally pulled into a small roadside campground outside Buena Vista, the sky was a pale watercolor of morning. The place had a handful of RVs, a ranger station, a few picnic tables. Civilization, finally. I parked near the other campers, left the van locked, and walked straight to the ranger's office. A man in his 50s sat behind the counter, gray hair, weathered face, the kind of look that said he'd seen everything the mountains could throw at a person. I told him what had happened, or at least most of it. Left out the parts about my paranoia, the sleeplessness, the way I kept hearing the same voice in my head even now. He listened quietly, nodding. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his jaw. "We've had some reports," he said finally. Couple folks said they saw a man hanging around trailheads. No one's caught him, but you did the right thing leaving. He handed me a local map, marked a few safer spots, and told me to stick to campgrounds with hosts for a while. As I stepped outside, the morning air felt thin, too clean. For a moment, I thought I could let it go, file it away as one of those strange mountain encounters that happen sometimes, harmless once they're over. But when I reached my van, I saw something that froze me where I stood. The back window was clean, wiped clear of dust, and written across it, this time in bold black marker, were the words, "You drive well." I stood there staring at the words, "You drive well." For a moment, the meaning didn't land. The letters were thick, deliberate, the kind of ink that seeps into glass, oily and black. Whoever had written them hadn't been in a hurry. My first thought wasn't fear. It was humiliation. Because somehow, between the ranger's office and the parking lot, I'd believed I was safe again. I'd let my guard down, just for a moment. And that was all it took. The ranger's voice echoed faintly from inside the cabin. The shuffle of papers, a radio crackle. I wanted to run back in and tell him, to show him, but something stopped me. It wasn't logic. It was shame. I didn't want him to look at me and see what I'd become. The woman who travels alone, who keeps her curtains shut, who's afraid of saying hello. So instead, I wiped the words off with a rag from my dashboard. The ink smeared, but I kept scrubbing until the glass blurred back to gray. Then I got behind the wheel and drove. I didn't have a destination. I just knew I couldn't stay there. The road unwound beneath me, long and skeletal. The Rockies rose on either side, pale with snow near the peaks, dark green below. Every time another car passed, I flinched. Every gas station felt too open, too exposed. By late afternoon, I found myself climbing again. Some narrow forest road with no signage, just a cracked asphalt lane that twisted upward until the trees closed in. The higher I went, the quieter it became. The radio lost its signal. The wind dropped. Even the sound of my tires felt muffled. When I finally stopped, it was more out of exhaustion than reason. I pulled into a small clearing bordered by pines and rocks, killed the engine, and sat there with my hands still gripping the steering wheel. Silence again. That same heavy silence from before, the kind that made the air feel thick, almost sentient. I got out, stretched my legs, tried to breathe. The air was cold enough to sting. The first hint of dusk was seeping into the sky. For the first time, I realized how long it had been since I'd actually talked to someone beyond the surface level, since I'd trusted anyone. The thought made my chest ache, not from fear this time, but from something lonelier, more hollow. I started a small fire with what wood I could find, cooked a can of soup, and told myself this would be it. One night to rest, then I'd head back to Denver, maybe even stay with a friend. Someone safe, someone real. But night came too quickly. The fire burned low, the air turned sharp, and the forest, that enormous cathedral of quiet, began to shift. I heard it first as a faint echo, the crunch of gravel far down the road. Headlights flickered through the trees, dim at first, then brighter. A vehicle was coming up the same road I'd taken. My pulse spiked. I turned off my lantern, crouched by the van, watching through the branches. The engine sound grew louder, then slowed. A truck, white, older model, the same kind I'd seen back at Pine Junction. It stopped just beyond the clearing. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing that same canvas jacket. He stood still for a long moment, facing my direction, though I couldn't tell if he saw me. Then he began walking slowly toward the clearing. I ducked behind the van, breathing shallowly, trying to think. My mind raced through options. Start the van and draw attention? Stay hidden and hope he left? Nothing felt safe. The footsteps came closer, steady, unhurried. He stayed the fire pit, staring at the fading embers. Then he spoke, almost conversationally. "You left in a hurry the other night." It was the same voice, the same tone, half amusement, half something darker. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My body moved before my brain did. I grabbed the can of bear spray from the glove compartment and flipped off the safety and stepped out from behind the van. "Get away from me," I said. He didn't move, just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "You're just hard to talk to. Leave." He took one slow step closer. "You shouldn't camp alone up here. Things happen to people." That was enough. I aimed the bear spray and pressed the trigger. The orange mist burst forward, catching the edge of his jacket and face. He stumbled back, cursing, wiping his eyes. I didn't wait. I jumped into the van, slammed the door, and started the engine. The headlights caught him in the beam, doubled over, clutching his face, before I tore out of the clearing. The van bounced hard over the ruts, engine whining, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't look back until I hit the main road again. A strip of asphalt cutting through the darkness. For the next half hour, I drove aimlessly, just trying to put miles between us. But the deeper truth pressed in with every mile. Even if I'd escaped him, I couldn't escape the fear he'd carved into me. At a small turnout overlooking the valley, I finally pulled over. The stars had come out, sharp and cold, the sky so clear it looked endless. I sat there shaking, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving only emptiness behind. And somewhere between exhaustion and dawn, I began to cry. Quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't even feel like release. Because I realized it wasn't just him I'd been running from. It was everyone. Every person I'd pushed away, every hand I hadn't taken, every moment I'd chosen solitude because trust felt too dangerous. The truth hit like a cold wind. The longer I stayed alone, the more I became like the thing I feared. Unpredictable, unreachable, lurking at the edges of my own life. When morning came, I drove back down the mountain. I stopped at a small ranger outpost to file a report this time. All of it, no omissions. The young woman behind the desk took notes, called a deputy, asked if I wanted to stay until they checked the area. I said yes. For once, I let someone help. They never found him. Just footprints near the lake, a few cigarette butts, and tire marks leading down an unmarked road. A week later, I replaced the rear window, the one he'd written on. But even clean, it still caught the light differently, as if the glass remembered. Now, months later, I still hear that voice sometimes. Not as sound, but as thought. "You out here alone?" and I still flinch when the forest goes silent too suddenly. But I keep traveling. I still take the van into the mountains, still sleep with the curtains drawn tight. The fear hasn't left me. Maybe it never will, but it's changed shape. Because somewhere between the terror and the solitude, I learned something I wish I'd understood sooner. Fear doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it just cages you. And when you've lived long enough behind those walls, you forget what it feels like to be seen, until something or someone forces you to look back at yourself. That night in the Rockies, I looked, and what I saw wasn't just a woman being hunted. It was a woman hiding from the world. Now, when I camp alone, I still listen to the wind, to the trees, to the creaks of the van settling in the dark. But I don't mistake every sound for danger anymore, because sometimes the mountains aren't warning you of what's out there. They're asking what's left inside. And if you're brave enough to listen, really listen, you might realize the echo you fear most has always been your own. I've always believed that silence can't hurt you. That was before Nevada, before the town with no name, before I learned that silence has teeth. My name's Marianne. I'm 39, and I've been living out of my Volkswagen camper van for almost 2 years now. I left my old life behind in Denver. The long work hours, the friendships that stopped feeling mutual, the man who taught me how to second-guess every instinct I had. The van became my shield, my home on wheels, my escape pod. I wasn't running away, not exactly, more like drifting in search of something quieter. Somewhere the noise couldn't reach. That's what drew me to the ghost towns. There's a website I follow, a map of abandoned places across the U.S. People post coordinates, photos, sometimes warnings. That week, I picked one that barely had any info at all. Just a pin in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, captioned "Abandoned Mining Town. Few structures left. Enter at your own risk." That line, "enter at your own risk," didn't scare me. It intrigued me. I left Tonopah just before dusk, the last gas station light disappearing in my rearview mirror as I headed down a cracked 2-lane road that seemed to dissolve into sand. My van hummed steadily, the engine soft like a heartbeat. By the time the sun started to bleed out behind the mountains, I saw what looked like the remains of a town. A few sagging roofs, a rusted water tower leaning at an angle, and a stretch of old storefronts half swallowed by the desert. No signs, no names, just wind and shadows. It looked perfect. I parked near the edge of what must have once been Main Street, a row of old wooden facades facing nothing but dust. My headlights caught the shimmer of broken glass. The air felt strange. Not cold exactly, but hollow. I stepped out, stretching my legs. The ground crunched under my boots. The only sound was wind hissing through warped doorways, whistling in a way that almost sounded like words if you listened too long. I started setting up camp. Simple things. Unfold the bed, switch on the string lights, heat a can of soup on my small stove. I even cracked a beer and put on a playlist, low enough not to disturb the emptiness. For a while, it was peaceful, but then the music started to sound wrong, or maybe it was just my nerves. The song ended, and in the silence between tracks, I thought I heard something faint, a rhythm, 3 soft knocks, thud, thud, thud. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. It came again, not from the van, not from the wind, somewhere outside. I turned off the music, held my breath. Nothing, just that low whine of air slipping through empty windows. I told myself it was the wind. That's what people always say in stories like this. I laughed it off, but the laugh sounded thin. To calm myself, I decided to walk around with my flashlight. Maybe if I explored a bit, I'd stop imagining things. The first building was an old store, faded letters still visible on the cracked sign. General Mercantile. The door hung open, hinges moaning when I nudged it. Inside, dust floated in my flashlight beam like snow. Shelves were still there, half collapsed, cans rusted to orange crusts. Someone had left a metal folding chair in the middle of the floor, facing the entrance. Empty. I don't know why, but that chair bothered me more than anything. It was too recent, too deliberate, like someone had been waiting for something, or someone. I stepped back and heard gravel crunch behind me. When I swung my light around, there was no one there. Just the van, a silhouette against the low hills. Still, I felt watched. I turned the flashlight off for a moment, trying to adjust to the dark, maybe see if any movement stood out. But what I saw instead were faint glimmers of light farther down the street. Tiny flickers. Like lanterns, or maybe flashlights. I blinked, and they vanished. That's when the first real unease hit. The kind that doesn't come from imagination, but from instinct. I hurried back to the van, locked the doors, and sat behind the wheel, staring out the windshield. The dashboard clock said 8:47. The wind had died down completely. The world felt suspended, as if even time was waiting for something to happen. And then, tap. A small sound, like a fingernail against glass. I turned my head slowly toward the passenger window. Nothing. Tap. Louder this time. Same window. I shined my flashlight quick and hard. The beam cut through the dark, catching only the curve of the mirror and my own reflection in the glass. I didn't move for a full minute. Just listened. Heart pounding so loud it almost drowned everything else. When I finally breathed again, I said out loud, "It's the wind. It's just the damn wind." But even as I said it, I knew the air outside was completely still. I decided to start the van just to feel the comfort of sound again. The engine turned over, headlights spilling over the street. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Fresh ones. Leading from the old store toward the back of town. Barefoot. I don't know how I could tell they were recent. Maybe it was just the way the edges still looked crisp, like the sand hadn't had time to reclaim them yet. I sat there for a long while, engine idling, lights fixed on that trail. The logical part of me said it could be hikers, urban explorers, anyone. The rest of me, the part that used to trust too easily, whispered that whoever left those prints didn't want to be seen. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. Nothing. Finally, I shut the engine off again. Tried to sleep, but sleep in that kind of silence isn't real. It's just waiting with your eyes closed. Somewhere around midnight, I heard the creaking sound of metal, like an old swing swaying in the wind, but there were no swings, no trees, just that same rhythmic noise. I sat up, barely breathing, peering through the curtains. A light flickered outside again, closer this time. It wasn't a flashlight, it was softer, warmer, like a lantern glow moving slowly between buildings. It disappeared behind a wall, reappeared near the old water tower. I should have driven away right then. Every instinct told me to. But part of me was caught, transfixed by the strangeness, by the need to understand. That's what gets people into trouble out here. Not ghosts, not killers, curiosity. So I unlatched the door quietly, stepped out barefoot to muffle the sound. The air was cold now, thin and metallic tasting. The sand shifted under my feet as I crept toward the water tower. The glow was gone, only the echo of my own pulse in my ears. Then something else. A smell, faint but unmistakable. Smoke. I looked around expecting to see firelight somewhere, but the town was swallowed in shadow. The smell was coming from the ground. Near the base of the tower, there was a shallow pit. Not quite a fire pit, but something someone had dug recently. Charred wood, melted glass bottles, a half-burned photograph lying on top of the ashes. I bent down and lifted it carefully. The edges crumbled in my hands. It was a picture of a camper van, my camper van. I didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds, my eyes locked on the half-burned photograph trembling in my hand. It was unmistakable. The same pale yellow Volkswagen, the same dent near the fender, even the little sticker on the rear window that said, "Not all who wander are lost." The photo looked old, edges brittle, colors faded, but it was my van. I felt my throat close up. My first thought was absurdly rational. Maybe someone else owned a van like mine once, and the resemblance was coincidence. But even as I told myself that, I noticed a detail that crushed that explanation. The license plate. Same numbers. Same state. My van. In a photograph that had clearly been burned years ago. I stood there under the water tower, the silence pressing in again. My flashlight trembled. The smell of char and rust filled the air. Somewhere, a piece of metal clanged in the distance. Soft, irregular, like it was being moved by a careful hand. That's when I dropped the photo. It didn't float down, it fell heavy, landing face down in the ash. I turned and started walking fast, the sand whispering beneath my feet. Then I was running. I didn't even look back until I was at the van's door. The headlights were still off. The world was black and endless. I yanked the handle, climbed in, and locked it. The slam of the door echoed too loudly. For a moment, I just sat there, shaking. My breath fogged the window. My reflection looked like a stranger's. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal, just a single bar flickering uselessly, as if mocking me. I tried the ignition. The van hesitated before starting, like even it didn't want to be here anymore. The plan was simple. Turn around, head back toward Tonopah, find light, people, safety. But the tires spun uselessly. Sand. The rear wheels had sunk deeper than I realized. I cursed under my breath and shifted into reverse, rocking the van gently, trying to free it. The engine growled. The whole vehicle lurched once, twice, but stayed stuck. That's when I saw movement. In the rearview mirror, a faint shape passed between two buildings. A person, or what looked like one, carrying something that flickered softly, like a lantern again. I turned off the headlights. Instinct. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely reach the switch. I sat there in the dark, staring into the mirror, praying that the figure would vanish. But it didn't. It moved slower now, stepping closer to the street, the glow revealing fragments of a body, pale arms, loose shirt, hair matted by wind. I couldn't see the face. Then it stopped, turned slightly toward me, and the light went out. Total blackness. I waited, every nerve screaming, but I couldn't hear footsteps. Couldn't tell if it was gone. I reached for the glove compartment, pulled out my flashlight, but before turning it on, I realized how stupid that would be. Light meant visibility. Visibility meant exposure. So I sat still, listening. Then, soft as a sigh, came that same rhythm I'd heard earlier. 3 dull knocks. Thud, thud, thud. Not on the door this time, on the side panel, right by where I was sitting. It was close enough that I felt it vibrate through the seat. I froze. My breath came shallow. I couldn't tell if the sound was testing me or if whoever, whatever, was out there already knew I was listening. I wanted to scream, to honk the horn, to do something loud enough to break this unbearable quiet. But some primitive instinct held me back. The kind of instinct that tells prey to stay still when the predator's breath is near. The knocks stopped. Then came the whisper. So faint I almost thought it was the wind again, but the words, if they were words, brushed against my ear like static through the glass. Still here. The flashlight slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a thud. The sound was tiny, but in that silence it was a gunshot. A pause followed. Then footsteps. Slow, retreating, gravel crunching, fading. I didn't move for 5 minutes. 10. The seconds stretched until they felt infinite. Finally, I forced myself to move. I turned the key again, revved the engine harder this time, rocking the van back and forth until I felt the tires catch. A sudden jolt and I was free. I gunned it, headlights cutting through the dark, the town blurring past. The road out was narrow, winding between low dunes. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. When I hit the open stretch of highway again, I didn't stop. Not until I saw the glow of a rest stop nearly 30 miles away. There were 2 trucks parked there, engines idling. Civilization. Noise. Light. I pulled up near a streetlight, left the van running, and stepped outside just to prove to myself that the world still existed. The air here felt different. Softer. Human. The smell of diesel, the hum of fluorescent bulbs. Normal. I laughed, a short, broken sound, and leaned against the van, trying to slow my heartbeat. That's when I noticed something on the back window. A smear, like someone had pressed their hand there. 5 clear prints, streaked in dust. The shape of the fingers was long, too long. I wiped it away with my sleeve and went back inside, locking the door even though I was in the middle of a lit parking lot. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat there till morning, staring at the highway until the horizon turned pink. When I finally got the courage to check the van again, I saw something wedged under one of the windshield wipers. A photograph. Not the burned one, a different one. This one was clean, recent, glossy, it showed me. standing outside my van the night before. Only I hadn't taken it. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that picture. The longer I looked, the more I noticed details. The exact moment it was taken, the slight turn of my body, my hair caught mid-motion. Someone had been close enough to capture that shot without me ever noticing. I drove to the nearest sheriff's office, told them everything, or most of it. I left out the voice, the burned photo. I didn't want them thinking I was crazy. The deputy on duty listened politely, took the picture, promised to look into it. He told me hikers sometimes wander into those ghost towns. Maybe I just crossed paths with one who thought it'd be funny to scare me. Funny. He didn't see the tremor in my hands when I handed him the photograph. He didn't smell the ash still clinging to my clothes. Before I left, he asked where I planned to camp next. I said I wasn't sure. But that night, as I parked at a crowded RV park near Reno, surrounded by people, dogs, chatter, the comforting glow of campfires, I realized that what scared me most wasn't that someone had followed me. It was that whoever took that photo knew something about me. They knew that even in a crowd, I'd still choose the spot farthest from everyone else. They knew I'd keep the curtains half closed, the light low, the engine ready. They knew I'd come here, not to be safe, but to pretend I was. And maybe that's what this life really does to you after a while. Living out of a van, chasing freedom down empty highways, you start thinking distance equals peace, that silence equals safety. But the truth is, silence just gives your fear more room to move. The photo was proof of that. Proof that sometimes what follows us isn't a person or a spirit or even a story. It's our own need to be alone until something else fills the space we left open. That night, I left the RV park before midnight. No reason, no plan, just the hum of the tires and the road ahead, endless and dark. And in the rearview mirror, just for a second, I thought I saw a faint light flicker on the highway behind me. Small, steady, following. I always thought the mountains would make me feel safe. Maybe that's why I kept coming back, because I believed that high up among the ridges and fog, the world below couldn't touch me. But that October evening, when the Blue Ridge turned violet and the air grew sharp with wood smoke, I realized something I wish I'd learned sooner. Solitude doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it's the perfect camouflage for danger. My name's Mara, I'm 42, and I've been traveling the country in my old 1974 Volkswagen camper for the better part of 3 years. She's a faded teal color, chipped on the doors, and she rattles like loose silverware when the road gets rough. I bought her after my divorce, said it was for the freedom, the open road, the quiet. But the truth is, I was running from noise, from people, from decisions that kept me up at night. That week I'd been driving south along the Blue Ridge Parkway, following the fading autumn colors down from Virginia into North Carolina. I wasn't looking for company, just somewhere to park for a few nights, somewhere I could write, hike, maybe breathe a little. By the time I found the Pisgah View campground, daylight was already thinning. The place looked half closed for the season, just a scattering of RVs and old trailers tucked into the trees. The main office light was on, but the door was locked, and a handwritten note on the glass said, "Manager on site, knock around back." I remember hesitating. There was something oddly quiet about the place. No kids, no radios, no campfires. Just the wind pushing through the bare trees and the sound of my own footsteps crunching gravel. Around the back of the office stood a man, maybe late 50s, bundled in a red flannel jacket. He was draining a bucket of mop water into the grass when he noticed me. "You looking for a spot?" he asked, voice rough but not unfriendly. I nodded, and he smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ain't many left open. You'll want Site 14, up near the ridgeline. Nice view, real quiet." He didn't ask for ID, didn't check anything, just handed me a folded receipt and waved me off. When I asked about payment, he shrugged. "You can settle up tomorrow. Ain't going nowhere, are ya?" Something about that phrasing stuck in my mind. Ain't going nowhere, but I brushed it off. People in small mountain towns talk different, I told myself. I was being paranoid. The road up to Site 14 wound through thick trees, dark enough that my headlights cut only narrow tunnels of light through the branches. The site sat alone on a rise overlooking the valley, just my van, a fire ring, and a weathered picnic table. From there, I could see the faint glow of a few other campers far below, but otherwise, it felt like the world dropped away. I parked, turned off the engine, and just listened. The night here was a different kind of silence, dense, layered. You could hear your own heartbeat in it. Then, faintly from somewhere down the slope, came the sound of laughter. Low, male, distant, not friendly laughter, the kind that stops too quickly. I told myself it was just other campers, people drinking, swapping stories. I tried to shake the unease as I unpacked, lit a lantern, and cooked a can of soup on the small propane stove. The warm smell filled the van, grounding me, and after a while, I felt stupid for being jumpy. I locked the doors, cracked a window, and climbed into the bunk. But sleep didn't come easy. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the faint hum of another engine. Through the slats of my curtain, I saw headlights moving slowly along the road below. Not fast, just creeping. I waited for them to pass. They didn't. The engine idled, low and steady, then cut off. Silence. I sat up, heart pounding. I thought about getting out, looking, but my body wouldn't move. The cold crept in through the seams of the van, and every sound seemed magnified, the ticking of the cooling engine, the whisper of wind on the canvas pop-top. Then I heard it, footsteps, crunching softly on the gravel outside my van. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped just by the driver's door, then came a faint scrape, metal against metal. My hand moved for the flashlight near the bed, but I froze before turning it on. Whoever it was, they were testing the handle. I wanted to yell, but fear does strange things. It doesn't always make you loud. Sometimes it just makes you still. After a long pause, the footsteps backed away. The crunch of gravel faded, then nothing. I waited. 10 minutes, maybe 20. Then, slowly, I leaned forward and peeked through the curtain. The night was empty. No headlights, no movement, just mist rolling in across the ridge. That's when I saw it on the driver's side mirror. A greasy handprint, smudged, fresh. I told myself it could have been from earlier, maybe from the gas station that afternoon. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, the world felt strangely normal. Sunlight filtered through the fog, birds calling from the pines. The handprint was still there, though, clearer now. I wiped it off before I could think too hard about it. When I went down to the office to pay, the red flannel man wasn't there. Instead, a woman in her 30s stood behind the counter, sorting mail. I asked if the man was around, said he'd given me Site 14. She frowned. "There's no one else working here this week," she said. "My husband's out in Asheville. You sure you talked to someone last night?" I stared at her, trying to find words. Tall guy, red jacket, gray hair, said his name was. But I realized he'd never told me his name. She shook her head slowly. "Ma'am, I think you must have seen one of the locals. Folks come through sometimes, say they're staff, try to get cash or get you to move to a spot that ain't on our map." My stomach dropped. Why would they do that? Her answer was quiet. Because up here, some people don't like outsiders camping alone. That's when I remembered his words again. "You ain't going nowhere, are ya?" And for the first time, I realized maybe it hadn't been a question. Maybe it was a promise. I drove back up the ridge right after that, ready to pack and leave. But when I reached my site, something was off. The ground under my van was disturbed, fresh boot prints circling the vehicle. And tucked beneath my windshield wiper was a piece of paper folded twice. On the outside, written in shaky pen, were 3 words, "You were right." I didn't open it. I don't know why. Fear, maybe, or instinct, but I left it there. I slammed the van into gear, turned around, and didn't stop until I was 20 miles down the mountain, parked at a diner off Route 276. Only then did I breathe again. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was some cruel prank. Maybe that woman just didn't know her coworker had shown up. Maybe. But even as I sat there, staring out at the misted ridges in the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. And when I finally stepped out to stretch my legs, I saw something that made my stomach turn. On the back of my van, traced faintly into the layer of dust, were the same 3 words, "You were right." I stood there beside the Volkswagen, the morning light sharp and colorless on the chrome, staring at the words scrawled into the dust. You were right. Right about what? That I shouldn't have come? That the mountains aren't as quiet as they look? That maybe, just maybe, solitude was never meant to feel this lonely? The letters were faint, but they hadn't been there when I left the campsite. Someone had followed me. Or worse, they'd already been nearby when I'd stopped here, watching me from another car, waiting for me to step away. I glanced around the diner lot. Only 3 vehicles sat scattered across the gravel. A rusty Ford pickup with a tarp in the back, a white sedan caked in dust, and a forest green Jeep idling by the gas pumps. Inside the diner, 2 truckers sat at the counter, laughing over coffee. Nobody looked my way. Still, every instinct screamed to get back in the van and drive. But drive where? I was miles from anywhere, and whoever had left that message, they knew that. I walked inside, pretending everything was normal. The bell above the door jingled. The air smelled like bacon and burnt coffee. A woman behind the counter smiled and said, "Take a seat wherever you like, hon." I nodded, sat by the window, and tried to calm my hands enough to hold the menu. Outside, the Jeep's driver, a man in a dark cap, leaned against the hood, smoking. His head turned slightly, as if looking at something behind the diner. Then he looked at me. Not long, just long enough that I knew it wasn't an accident. I felt my stomach twist. Maybe it was the same man. I couldn't be sure. The night before, I'd barely seen him in the dark. But that feeling, that quiet recognition, settled somewhere deep and cold. I wanted to tell someone. The waitress, maybe. But what would I even say? That someone might have followed me from a campground because I parked in the wrong spot? It would sound paranoid. And that's what I kept doing. Doubting myself, rationalizing, explaining away the small warnings until they built into something too big to ignore. When I finally paid and left, the Jeep was gone. Relief came. Shallow and temporary, like stepping out of a nightmare into daylight only to realize it's still following you. I decided to find a new campground, somewhere public, somewhere busy. I searched my phone. Service was weak, but one place showed up, Bear Creek RV Park, about 30 minutes east near Asheville. Perfect. I told myself I'd stay there a night or 2. Reset. Laugh at how silly I'd been. The road wound lower through the mountains, through small towns with closed gas stations and peeling motels. The farther I drove, the more I started to believe it had all been in my head. But fear doesn't let go that easily. Not when it's earned. About 10 miles from the park, my van began to sputter. I cursed softly, gas gauge still half full, temperature normal. Then the engine coughed, lurched once, and died. I steered onto the shoulder, heart racing. The silence afterward felt enormous. I popped the back hatch and checked the engine. Nothing obvious, no smoke, no smell. I turned the key again. Nothing. Dead. That's when I heard it, the slow crunch of gravel. A vehicle approaching. I stepped back toward the road. It was the Jeep, the same forest green one from the diner. It slowed beside me, window rolling down. The man inside smiled faintly. "Need a hand?" His voice. I recognized it instantly. The same tone, same rough drawl as the man in the red flannel. Only now he wore a gray jacket, clean-shaven. But I knew. Every muscle in my body went rigid. "No, I'm fine," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just overheated a bit. I've got someone coming." He looked at the empty road behind me, then back at me. His smile didn't change. "Funny, didn't see no one pass me headed this way. You sure?" I nodded. "Positive." He let the silence stretch. Then he said, softer, "You drive careful up here. Roads got a way of keeping folks longer than they plan." Then he rolled the window up, eased the Jeep forward, and disappeared around the curve. I stood there for a full minute, frozen, before I realized I'd been holding my breath. I didn't care about the van anymore. I grabbed my phone, stuffed it in my pocket, and started walking toward the curve, hoping to get service, to flag down anyone who wasn't him. A mile later, a small car stopped. A young woman leaned out. "You okay, ma'am? Need a lift?" I could have cried from relief. "Yes, please." Just to the next town. She nodded. Hop in. As we drove, I told her bits of it. The fake campground host, the van breaking down, the man following me. She listened, eyes wide, then said quietly, "You should talk to the sheriff in Asheville. Stuff like that's been happening more lately. People pretending to help campers, especially women alone. They scope out gear, wallets, sometimes worse." I felt sick. "So it's real?" She nodded grimly. "My cousin works in law enforcement. Said they found a van a few months back, abandoned in the same area. Belonged to a woman from Tennessee. Never found her." That ride to town felt like forever. When she dropped me at a small police station on the outskirts of Asheville, my legs trembled stepping out. The officer at the desk, gray-haired, calm, listened to everything, jotting notes, asking details. When I mentioned the name of the campground, his expression darkened. "Pisgah View," he said. "Yeah, we've had reports. Some fella going around claiming to be staff. Never caught him. Folks say he changes clothes, vehicles, sometimes his hair. Always picks the isolated sites." I swallowed hard. "Then what happens?" He met my eyes. "Depends how soon they realize they're being watched." That night, they towed my van back to the station. The mechanic called me the next morning, said the gas line had been cleanly cut. Not torn, not chewed. Cut. With a blade. He said it like he was trying not to scare me, but the words hit like ice. Cut. Someone had planned for me to break down. They searched the area where the van had stopped, found tire tracks nearby. Jeep tires. For 2 days, I stayed at a motel near the highway, jumping at every knock, every sound in the hallway. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing that handprint on the mirror, those words in the dust. You were right. Right about what? That danger doesn't always look dangerous? On the third morning, I packed up, ready to leave the state entirely. I filled the gas tank, checked every lock twice, and sat in the driver's seat watching the sun rise over the ridge. For a moment, I almost felt peace again. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A Jeep, forest green, parked 3 rows behind me, engine. I didn't wait to see who was inside. I pulled onto the road, heart hammering, and drove until the mountains fell away behind me and the landscape flattened into open highway. Only then did I start to breathe again. I never saw him after that, not once. But sometimes when I park the van at night and the woods go still, I think I hear footsteps outside. The soft crunch of gravel, the faint scrape of metal on metal. And I remember what the woman at the office said, some people don't like outsiders camping alone. But that's not the truth. Not really. It's not that they don't like you. It's that they notice you. They see your habits, your trust, your quiet. They count on your hesitation. They wait for you to explain away what your gut already knows. And the lesson I learned out there in those fog-wrapped mountains is simple but heavy. Your instincts aren't paranoia. They're the echo of every person who ignored a warning and didn't get a second chance. So now, every time I lock that van door, every time I park somewhere new, I listen to the silence, not to feel safe, but to remember what it cost me to survive it. Because I was right. And next time, I'll listen. There's something strange about silence after fear. When the adrenaline drains and your heartbeat finally slows, it's not peace that comes next. It's clarity. Clarity so sharp it cuts through everything else. I used to think fear was the enemy. That being afraid meant I was weak or naive or not built for this kind of life. Alone, on the road, chasing quiet places. But fear isn't the problem. Fear is the language of instinct. It's your body's last way of saying, pay attention when your mind is too busy making excuses. I look back now and I can trace every moment where I hesitated, where I told myself I was overreacting, that I should be polite, that people are mostly good, and maybe most are. But not all. The dangerous ones. They count on your hesitation. They thrive in it. They see your kindness as an invitation, your silence as permission, your trust as opportunity. That man in the mountains, he probably forgot me the moment I drove away. But I still think about him every time I see the fog settle low over the ridges, because he taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. There's a fine line between solitude and isolation, and once you cross it, there's no one left to hear you scream. Now, when I camp, I still love the quiet. I still park where the stars look close enough to touch, but I keep the van backed toward the exit. I never tell strangers where I'm heading next, and I trust the feeling, the one that rises in my chest before the mind can explain it away. Because out there, surrounded by miles of trees and darkness, your instincts are all you have. They're older than reason, older than fear itself. And when the mountains go quiet, when the wind stops, and even the birds fall silent, that's not peace. That's the world holding its breath, waiting to see if you'll listen. So, if you ever find yourself camping alone in North Carolina, and the fog rolls in thick and slow, and someone tells you, "You ain't going nowhere, are ya?" Don't smile and nod. Don't wait for proof. Just trust yourself and go. I used to think the mountains couldn't lie. You look at them, those blue-gray spines along the horizon, and they seem honest, steady, eternal, the kind of place where you can breathe again. But last summer, somewhere deep in the San Juan range of southern Colorado, I learned that even mountains have shadows that don't move with the sun. And I'll never forget how it felt to be alone among them when the truth started to shift beneath me. My name's Caroline, I'm 43, and for the past few years I've been traveling solo in an old 1978 Volkswagen Westfalia that I rebuilt myself. I named her June. She rattles, she leaks, and the radio only plays AM stations when she feels like it. But she's mine. I left behind a small house in Flagstaff after my divorce, and I told myself I'd use the road to figure out what came next. Freedom, solitude, peace. All the words people use to make loneliness sound noble. By July, I'd already camped my way through Utah and New Mexico, chasing quiet places. That's how I found a place called Lake Isabel, a tucked-away campground about 2 hours southwest of Pueblo, Colorado. The photos online showed water so still it looked like polished glass, pine trees crowding the edges like spectators. It was supposed to be peaceful, a good place to stay a few nights, recharge, maybe hike a trail or two. But I arrived on a weekday and the place was nearly empty. That should have been the first sign. There were only 3 other campers scattered across the loop, a family with 2 kids down near the water, a middle-aged man in a dark green pickup a few sites over, and a young couple in a small tent near the trailhead. When I parked June in spot 17, I noticed the quiet first. Not silence exactly, but a kind of muffled stillness. The way sound doesn't travel right at altitude. Even when I slammed the van door, it didn't echo. It just stopped. That night, I built a small fire and cooked some lentils on the camp stove. Around dusk, the couple by the trailhead waved as they passed, holding flashlights. They said they were going to watch the stars from a ridge about a mile up. I wished them a good night, then watched their lights disappear into the trees. By 10, I was inside the van, writing in my travel journal, the fire long out. The wind had picked up, brushing through the pines with a low, even breath. I remember thinking it sounded almost human, like a sigh that never ended. At some point after midnight, I woke up. Something had scraped along the outside of the van, not an animal, at least not one I recognized. It was too slow, too deliberate, a thin, dragging sound along the metal siding from front to back. I froze, listening. My mind rushed to make it make sense, maybe a branch in the wind or a raccoon searching for food. But then it stopped right by the rear window, inches from where my head rested. And then, nothing. Just the quiet hiss of wind again. I didn't move for 10 minutes. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it against the mattress. Eventually, I talked myself down, told myself it was nothing. The mind can twist sounds in the dark until they look like monsters. I peeked through the curtain, saw only the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. Nothing moved. By morning, I almost laughed about it. The fear felt childish in daylight. I made coffee, read a bit by the lake, and convinced myself to stay another night. After all, that's what I came out here for, to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. But unease lingers, even after you name it. Later that afternoon, I walked over to the small service area where a ranger's bulletin board stood. Someone had pinned up a missing person flyer, a woman, mid-30s, short brown hair. The paper was sun-bleached and curling at the edges like it had been there a while. The name read Allison Fry. The date, June 2022. I felt that tiny ripple in my stomach again, the one that comes before your mind admits something's off. But I didn't linger. Just snapped a photo of the board and told myself it had nothing to do with me. When I got back to my site, the man in the green pickup was sitting on his tailgate, smoking. He had one of those faces that never seems to hold a steady expression. Eyes that smiled and frowned at the same time. He nodded at me and asked how long I planned to stay. His voice had that easy local drawl that made every question sound friendly, but I felt a small hesitation before answering. Maybe one more night, I said. He smiled. Not many folks camp midweek. Quiet out here, huh? I nodded. He flicked the cigarette away, then added, "Be careful up by the ridge. Bears sometimes wander down at night." I thanked him and went back to the van, trying not to make anything of it. But later, I noticed something strange. The couple with the tent never came back. Their car was still parked by the trailhead, the tent still pitched, but no one moved around it all evening. I kept glancing over, half expecting to see their flashlights appear again in the trees, but the darkness swallowed the trail completely. Around 10, I heard a new sound, faint, rhythmic, and wrong. Not the wind this time. It was a dull thunk, 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 spaced every few seconds, like something tapping wood or knocking. I turned off my lantern and listened. The noise came from the direction of the trailhead. It stopped, then started again, closer. I grabbed the flashlight, opened the van door quietly, and shone the beam across the clearing. Nothing. Just the shimmer of the lake and the empty loop road curving through the pines. But when the light hit the tent, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The zipper flap was open, swaying gently, and inside the sleeping bags were gone. That's when I realized how alone I actually was. No cell signal. The ranger station had closed hours ago. The family with kids had left earlier in the day. And that man in the green pickup, his truck was still there, but his campsite was dark. I told myself to calm down. Maybe the couple went to town or to another campground. Maybe I'd just been too long on the road, too many nights alone. I locked the van, pulled the curtains tight, and tried to sleep. But sleep doesn't come easy when your instincts are screaming at you. Every creak of the van felt like movement outside. Every whisper of wind became breath. I lay there, gripping my flashlight like a weapon, heart racing for hours. Somewhere past 2 a.m., exhaustion finally pulled me under. When I woke up, it was dawn, and someone had left something on my picnic table, a small tin mug filled halfway with coffee that was still faintly warm. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. The mug looked so ordinary sitting there on the weathered wood, silver tin catching the first orange spill of morning light. But that faint wisp of steam rising from it, that was real. And in the middle of nowhere, it meant one thing. Someone had been close enough to my van, close enough to know I was asleep inside, and decided to leave me something. The kind of gesture that's only polite if you asked for it, and I hadn't. I stepped out barefoot, the cold biting through the thin layer of dew on the dirt. The mug wasn't mine. I was sure of it. Mine had a dent on the rim from a trip in Utah. This one was clean, like something from a store shelf. The coffee smelled faintly burnt, as if it had been reheated over an old fire. I looked around, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the woods felt awake, like they were watching me. I dumped the coffee out, rinsed my hands with the last of my bottled water, and threw the mug in the trash compartment of June. I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't stop. Every scenario circled through my mind. Maybe the guy in the green pickup had brought it, trying to be friendly. Or maybe the couple from the tent returned overnight, realized I looked alone, and thought it would be a kind gesture. Except their car was still there. The tent still empty. I decided I was leaving that morning, but when I turned the ignition key, June gave me nothing but a dry click. Then another. Dead battery. That's when panic first whispered, not full-blown fear, but the start of it. I'd been through plenty of mechanical hiccups before. This was different. I had solar backup for the fridge and a battery monitor that should have prevented a full drain. Someone would have had to turn on every light in the van, maybe even the radio, to kill it that fast. I stepped outside again, circling to the back. My heart thudded as I noticed faint footprints in the damp dirt. Not boots, sneakers, medium-sized, leading away from the driver's side toward the trees. I felt the shift then. The quiet no longer sounded peaceful. It sounded hollow, as if the forest itself had emptied out to make room for something else. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. I checked my phone. 1 bar, flickering, then gone. I told myself to stay calm, to think. The ranger station was about 3 miles down the road. I could hike there, call for a jump, maybe even report the strange coffee gesture if it kept gnawing at me. I packed a small bag, locked the van, and started walking. The gravel road wound down through the trees, sunlight flickering through like it couldn't quite break free. For a while, it almost felt good to move, the rhythm of boots crunching rock, the crisp air clearing my head. But after maybe 20 minutes, I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Slow. Matching my pace. I stopped. So did they. When I turned, the road was empty. No car, no person, just the sound of wind combing through pine needles. I waited, staring back toward the bend where the campground disappeared from view. Nothing. I forced myself to keep walking, but that feeling, the sense of being observed, stuck to me like static. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder just to make sure. Every time, the road was empty. When the ranger station finally came into view, a small wooden cabin with a U.S. Forest Service sign out front, relief hit like a wave. I jogged the last 100 feet, climbed the steps, and pushed on the door. Locked. A hand-painted sign said, "Back at 2 p.m., emergency radio on porch." I checked my watch. 11:17 a.m., I exhaled, sat down on the porch bench, and reached for the radio, a bulky old model wired to a battery box. The signal light flickered when I pressed the talk button, but the speaker only hissed static. That's when I noticed the pickup truck, parked about 30 yards away behind the tree line, green with a dented fender, the same one from the campsite. I froze. No one was inside, but the driver's door hung half open. A cooler sat on the tailgate, lid unlatched. I scanned the woods again. Still no movement, no sound of boots or voice. I should have gone back to the porch, but something in me wanted confirmation. Wanted to know if my fear had a face. I walked closer, just enough to see inside the truck bed. The cooler was filled with melted ice water, a few beer cans, a tin mug. The same kind, clean, no dent. My throat went dry. I turned to go back toward the ranger cabin, and that's when I saw movement between the trees. A shape, half hidden in shadow. A man, maybe 40 or 50, wearing a faded brown jacket. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, toward the road I'd just come from. Then he started walking. Not toward me, but parallel to the tree line, slow, deliberate steps, as if circling. That was enough. I ran. I didn't even think. I just sprinted down the dirt road, heart slamming, gravel kicking up behind me. The van was still 3 miles away, but the idea of staying put near that truck felt worse. My breath came in ragged bursts, lungs burning in the thin air. Somewhere behind me, I heard an engine start. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the bend that led toward my campsite, I could hear the hum of tires on gravel. The truck was following, slow and steady. Every instinct in my body screamed to get off the road. I veered into the woods, ducking behind a fallen tree, pressing myself flat. The truck rolled past, barely 10 feet away. And in that moment, I saw the driver's face clearly through the windshield. The same man from the pickup, the one who'd warned me about bears. He wasn't smiling now. He was scanning the woods, eyes darting side to side. I waited until I couldn't hear the engine anymore. Then I moved, quietly, fast, staying parallel to the road until I could see the outline of June through the trees. She looked small, helpless. I crept closer, heart pounding so hard it blurred the sound of everything else. The van door was still locked, no sign of tampering. But as I approached the driver's side, I saw something written in the dirt on the rear window. A single word, scrawled with a finger, "Stay." My hands shook. I unlocked the door, climbed in, and slammed it shut behind me. My breath fogged the glass. For a moment I couldn't think, just sat there staring at that word. Stay. A command. A threat. A warning. Then, from somewhere out on the loop road came the sound of tires again, the crunch of gravel drawing nearer. I ducked down, heart racing. The truck rolled into view, slow and deliberate, headlights off. It stopped right in front of my campsite. The engine idled. I could see the driver's silhouette motionless. Minutes passed. The truck just sat there. And then, as quietly as it came, it reversed down the loop and disappeared into the trees. I didn't move for almost an hour. When I finally did, I started packing everything. I didn't care about order or noise. I just wanted to leave. I turned the key again, and this time the engine coughed, sputtered, and came alive. I drove out of that campground faster than I ever thought June could move, hands shaking on the wheel, eyes flicking to the mirrors every few seconds. The road twisted through the forest like a tunnel. For miles, I saw nothing but trees until I reached the highway and realized there was another car behind me, the same green pickup. He wasn't tailgating, just following, keeping distance. Every turn I took, he took. Every slowdown, he slowed. The fear that had been simmering all night finally boiled over. I wasn't imagining this anymore. For 20 miles, that pickup clung to me like a shadow, not close enough to force me off the road, not far enough to pretend it was a coincidence. Every time the highway curved, I'd catch the flash of its dented fender in my mirror, that green like oxidized copper under the sun. I couldn't see the driver's face anymore, but I didn't have to. I could feel his gaze, a steady, unbroken line running between us like a hook I couldn't pull free from. The highway was nearly empty. I passed a few semis, a motorcyclist heading the other way, but no one stayed long enough to notice what was happening. The landscape opened into that wide Colorado nothingness, dry plains pushing up against distant ridges, sky too big, too bright. I tried to tell myself I was safe in motion, that as long as the wheels kept spinning, I had control. But deep down, I knew control was an illusion. He wasn't chasing me anymore. He was hurting me. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached. My mind ran in circles. Should I pull into a gas station? Flag down help? But what if he followed me inside, pretended we were together? That's what terrified me most, the normalcy he could wear like a mask. Out here, people talk to each other. A woman and a man show up at a rest stop and no one asks questions. I remembered the words scrawled on my van, stay. Now I wondered if it had been a threat or a warning. There was a split in the highway ahead, a smaller county road veering west toward a town called La Veta. I made the turn sharp and sudden, hoping to catch him off guard. In the rearview mirror, the truck hesitated. Then it followed. My pulse spiked. This road was narrower, curving along the side of a slope, pine trees crowding close again. Every few hundred feet there was a turnout. Small dirt shoulders meant for scenic views. My mind started to map them, looking for one where I could do something reckless if I had to. About 5 minutes in, I saw one of those turnouts open up on the right, wide enough for 2 vehicles. Without thinking, I hit the brakes, pulled in hard, and killed the engine. The pickup came around the bend seconds later, too fast to stop. It barreled past me, then braked, its back end fishtailing in the gravel. I could see him through the rear window now, the man's head turning, eyes narrowing when he realized I'd stopped. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other through glass and distance. Then he threw his truck into reverse. Instinct took over. I floored it. June roared back onto the highway, tires spitting gravel. The engine howled like it hadn't in years. I didn't look back again until I hit 65. The pickup was a shrinking shape behind me, then a speck, then nothing. I kept driving anyway. For 2 hours straight. When I finally pulled into a gas station near Walsenburg, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely get the key out of the ignition. The attendant must have seen my face because he came out right away, asking if I was okay. I nodded, even though I wasn't. "Old guy in a green truck," I heard myself say. "Been following me since Lake Isabel." He frowned. "You mean the one with the dented side and missing tail light?" My heart dropped. Yeah, he sighed, shaking his head. We've had a few complaints. Sheriff's been looking for him, says he's been hanging around the campgrounds, offers help, then gets weird. That word, weird, landed heavier than it should have. The man let me use his phone to call the sheriff's office. I gave them everything: the location, the mug, the footprints, the truck, the word on the van. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but even as I spoke, I knew how it would go. Men like that, they slip through the cracks. Too polite to arrest, too unsettling to forget. I stayed at that gas station for hours, just sitting inside June, engine off, staring at the highway. Every car that passed made my chest tighten. I told myself I'd head east toward Kansas, maybe find a motel, get some distance. But part of me couldn't move yet. I needed to understand what had happened. Because here's the thing about fear. It isn't just the moment you're in danger. It's what comes after. The way your mind keeps rebuilding the trap, step by step, asking what you could have done differently. When the sheriff's deputy finally called me back that evening, he said they'd gone out to the campground. The green pickup was gone. The ranger station was locked again. The tent by the trailhead was still empty. They found no sign of the couple or of anyone named Allison Fry. The missing person poster I'd seen wasn't in the bulletin board anymore. I asked if they thought it was connected. The deputy hesitated before saying, "We can't confirm that, ma'am," which meant, maybe. After that, I didn't camp for a while. I spent nights in motel parking lots, engine idling, one hand always close to the ignition. Every noise outside made me flinch. The wind through the vents started sounding like that same scraping from the first night. The line between real danger and remembered fear blurred until I couldn't tell which was worse. But slowly, over weeks, something shifted. The fear didn't go away, it just changed shape. It stopped being a threat and became a kind of awareness, a sharpness I'd never had before. I realized that I'd been chasing solitude for the wrong reasons. I thought being alone meant freedom. But real freedom isn't just leaving things behind. It's learning which instincts to trust when no one else is around to confirm them. Every small warning, every shiver of unease that I'd brushed aside out of politeness or self-doubt, those were my alarms. And I'd ignored them because I didn't want to seem paranoid. Because women are taught to be kind before cautious. Now, I know better. I still travel in June, though I keep her closer to civilization these days. I check my mirrors more often. I write down license plates that linger too long. And sometimes, when I stop at a campsite and see another solo traveler, I'll tell them this story. Not to scare them, but to remind them that peace and safety aren't the same thing. The mountains are still beautiful. Colorado is still beautiful. But I'll never go back to Lake Isabel. Not because of what happened there, but because of what it showed me about myself. The version of me that kept trying to explain the danger away. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes when fear finally speaks louder than doubt. It's the moment you stop waiting for someone to rescue you. It's the moment you become your own warning. I think about that mug sometimes, the faint wisp of steam, the quiet message in its warmth. Maybe it was meant to trick me, or maybe it was a test, a way of asking if I was still asleep at the wheel of my own instincts. Either way, I woke up that morning and never looked at the world the same again, because once you've been hunted in a place that's supposed to heal you, once you've watched the line between wilderness and threat blur into one, you understand that danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it leaves you coffee. And sometimes it teaches you that survival isn't about strength, it's about listening.